In the medieval world, a kingdom was not a modern state. It was a family's property, guarded by oaths, castles, and the fragile belief that God approved the order of succession. When that belief cracked, when a king died too soon, when a queen protected a son, when a powerful brother refused to be only a brother, war did not begin as an invasion from outside. It began at the dinner table. A crown could turn siblings into rivals, and rivals into commanders, and commanders into the kind of men who learned to burn their own countryside for leverage. Medieval civil war often followed a familiar pattern. A ruler died, leaving an heir too young, too absent, too disliked, or too weak. The nobles, earls, barons, bishops did what they always did. They chose sides, because neutrality was dangerous and loyalty was negotiable. Castles became the real capitals. Whoever held the strong points controlled roads, grain, and the ability to tax. And in a world where travel was slow and communication unreliable, rumors could govern as effectively as law. A prince did not need a perfect legal claim. He needed momentum, allies, and a story that made his ambitions sound like duty. One of the clearest medieval examples of brothers at war is England's anarchy, 1135 or 1153, a crisis that began the moment King Henry I died. Henry's only legitimate son had drowned in the White Ship disaster, so Henry forced the magnates to swear to accept his daughter, Empress Matilda, as heir. But the oath was brittle. When Henry died, Matilda's cousin Stephen of Blois moved faster, seized the treasury, charmed enough bishops, and took the crown. What followed was not a single battlefield decision, but a long grind of shifting loyalties, sieges, ransoms, and private war. What later writers remembered as a time when Christ and his saints slept. Matilda did not conquer England. She contested it. Stephen did not truly rule. He survived it. The result was a compromise. Stephen kept the crown, but named Matilda's son, Henry Plantagenet, as heir, creating a dynasty born from civil war bargaining rather than clean succession. From that point, medieval England repeatedly returned to the same sickness. The crown was powerful enough to be worth fighting for, but not stable enough to prevent fights. Under the Plantagenets, brothers and close kin became political weapons. Kings tried to control succession by granting lands and titles to younger sons, but those grants created semi-independent power bases. A younger brother with an army and a grievance could behave like a rival king in everything but name. Even when the quarrel was not literally between brothers, it often felt like family war. Uncles against nephews, cousins against cousins, great houses splitting into branches that hated each other with intimate knowledge. A dramatic illustration is the conflict between Henry II and his sons in the late 12th century. Henry II built an empire of sorts: England, Normandy, Anjou, Aquitaine through marriage. Yet he struggled to manage the ambitions of his heirs: Henry the young king, Richard, Geoffrey, and John. His sons wanted authority, not allowances. Rebellions broke out. Alliances formed with France. Castles changed hands. This was family politics conducted with siege engines. It showed a brutal medieval truth. Granting your son a title could be interpreted as giving him a throne he would sooner take by force than wait to inherit. The theme deepens in the late medieval period with the Wars of the Roses, 1455-1487. A civil war not neatly framed as brother versus brother, but fueled by dynastic branches so close they might as well have been siblings in the mind of the realm. The House of Lancaster and the House of York were both Plantagenet descendants. Their claim to rule depended on bloodline, legitimacy, and the ability to win. When King Henry VI proved unable to provide firm leadership, through long bouts of incapacity and political weakness, the magnates stopped pretending the crown was sacred and began treating it as a prize. Battles like St. Albans, Towton, Barnet, and Tewkesbury were not only military contests, they were arguments about who counted as lawful. Each victory rewrote the legal story after the fact. What makes these civil wars feel like brothers at war is the intimacy of betrayal. In medieval chronicles, the shock is not just violence. It is the violation of expected relationships. A noble swore homage, then broke it. A prince promised peace, then raised banners. A brother sat at the same Christmas table, then financed the siege of the other's fortress. In a society built on personal bonds, civil war was a kind of moral collapse, but also a practical method of negotiation. Many medieval wars ended not with annihilation, but with hostage exchanges, marriages, pardons, confiscations, and carefully staged reconciliations that looked holy on parchment while remaining tense in reality. The mechanics of these wars were slow and harsh. Medieval campaigns relied on seasons. Armies moved when roads were passable and supplies could be taken. Major battles were risky because a single defeat could end a career. Therefore, commanders often preferred sieges, raids, and the control of choke points. Castles mattered more than open fields. A civil war could become a patchwork of local conflicts. One lord taking a rival's manor, one sheriff refusing orders, one bishop preaching legitimacy for the right claimant. Ordinary people suffered in the most predictable ways: burned crops, stolen livestock, forced labor, arbitrary punishment. Civil war did not have to be constant to be devastating. It only needed to be uncertain, because uncertainty destroys trade, planting, trust, and planning. Over time, these wars reshaped medieval monarchy. Rulers learned that legitimacy was not only blood, it was administration and perception. Stronger legal institutions emerged partly to control succession disputes and limit private war. Kings became more careful about rewarding relatives and more suspicious of overmighty subjects. Yet the paradox remained. The crown needed noble support to govern, and noble support could be bought, pressured, or lost. Even a victorious king often inherited a realm full of grudges, widows, disinherited heirs, and dispossessed men ready to rebel again. And so the entire story of brothers at war is not one single conflict, but a medieval pattern repeated across generations. Inheritance creates rivals, rivals find allies, allies raise armies, and a family argument becomes a national disaster. A medieval crown was both a symbol and a machine. It demanded obedience, but it also tempted ambition. In that tension, brothers, literal or dynastic, became enemies, and kingdoms learned, painfully and slowly, that the most dangerous wars are sometimes the ones fought inside the same house. Close your eyes now. Let the noise of the modern day fade into a velvet silence, replaced by the deep, rhythmic breathing of the past. Imagine you are standing in a high stone chamber, the air cool and smelling faintly of dried lavender, wood smoke, and beeswax candles. Outside, a winter wind presses against the shutters, rattling the iron latches. But inside, the hearth fire creates a safe, golden island of light, casting long, soft shadows that dance across the tapestries on the walls. You are safe here, hidden in the gentle twilight of history, watching time unspool like a spool of dark thread. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. We stand now at the edge of the year 1087, a time when the concept of England itself is being hammered into shape like hot iron on an anvil, glowing red in the dark forge of ambition. Historians still argue whether the great William the Conqueror intended to divide his realm among his sons, or if the chaos that followed was merely the price of his overwhelming personality, a shadow that lingered long after the man himself was gone. But what we know is that a king's death was the most dangerous moment in the life of a kingdom, a time when the law held its breath. It is a time of whispers in corridors, of couriers riding horses to exhaustion in the driving rain, and of brothers eyeing one another, not as playmates, but as obstacles to a destiny only one can hold. The tapestry of history is rich and heavy, woven with threads of gold and blood, ambition and regret, and tonight we run our fingers over its texture, feeling the rough knots and the smooth silk of royalty. There is a strange peace in this distance, a comfort in knowing that while their fury was real, it is now only a story, a lullaby of power that we can observe without fear. The candles burn low, the shadows stretch across the flagstones, and the first chapter of our long tale begins to breathe in the quiet dark. The bells of Rouen Cathedral are tolling, a heavy iron sound that rolls over the slate roofs of the city and dissolves into the mists of the River Seine. It is September in the year 1087, and the air is thick with the scent of burning beeswax and the murmur of anxious prayers. In the priory of Saint-Gervais, just outside the city walls, the man who broke England is now being broken by something far smaller. An internal injury from a saddle pommel, a mundane end for a figure of such terrifying myth. William the Conqueror, the bastard duke who reshaped the map of Europe, lies on his deathbed, his massive frame struggling for breath, his mind turning not to battles won, but to the sins that now weigh upon his soul like wet wool. The room is crowded with bishops and physicians, their robes rustling like dry leaves, but there is a distinct lack of familial warmth. The conqueror's house is divided, just as his realm is about to be. Of his 3 surviving sons, the eldest, Robert, is absent, currently in exile after rebelling against his father, a quarrel over money and respect that saw the son unhorse the father in battle. The second son, William Rufus, stands by the bedside, his eyes bright with a mixture of grief and calculation. And the youngest, Henry, sits quietly in the corner, watching with the intense, patient gaze of a young man who knows that his inheritance will be nothing but gold and patience. Here, in the dim light of the death chamber, the great division begins. Historians still argue whether William truly intended to split his empire, or if he was simply following the old Norman custom of inheritance. The ancestral lands, Normandy, must go to the firstborn, regardless of his flaws, while the conquered lands, England, are the father's to give as he pleases. With his last breaths, William grudgingly acknowledges Robert's right to the Duchy of Normandy, despite predicting that the boy will ruin it. To William Rufus, he gives the crown of England, but advises him to cross the sea immediately, before the old king is even cold, to secure the keys to the treasury. To Henry, the youngest, he leaves 5,000 pounds of silver, a fortune certainly, but no land. When Henry complains that money is useless without a place to stand, the old king whispers a prophecy that sounds more like a curse. Wait, for you shall have all that I have gained. It is a chilling promise, one that requires the deaths of his brothers to fulfill. The moment the king's breath stops, the atmosphere in the room shifts instantly from mourning to looting. The attendants, realizing their patron is gone and the new order is uncertain, strip the room bare, taking the linens, the silver plate, even the royal robes, leaving the conqueror's body naked on the floor. It is a stark, almost darkly funny reminder of medieval reality. Power is a performance, and without the actor, the props are just merchandise. This indignity is the first crack in the foundation, a signal that the iron grip of the central authority has loosened. William Rufus does not stay to handle the funeral. He is already on a horse, galloping toward the coast, racing the wind to Winchester. Robert Curthose, so named for his fashionably short boots, which perhaps did not lend him the gravitas of a duke, returns to Normandy to claim his title. The English Channel now becomes a dangerous divide. For the barons of the realm, this separation is a political nightmare. These men hold estates in both Normandy and England. If they obey Duke Robert, King William Rufus will confiscate their English manors. If they obey King William, Duke Robert will seize their Norman castles. As one chronicler writes, "No man can serve two masters, for he will love the one and hate the other." The result is the rebellion of 1088, a civil war that feels less like a clash of nations and more like a frantic attempt by the nobility to simplify their tax returns. The great magnates, led by the conqueror's own half-brother, Bishop Odo of Bayeux, decide that the only solution is to reunite the realms under one man. They choose Robert, not because he is stronger, but because he is weaker, a lazy, genial warrior who is easier to manipulate than the fierce, red-faced Rufus. The fires of rebellion are lit across the south of England. Castles in Kent and Sussex bolt their gates. Knights scour the countryside for supplies. But William Rufus proves he is his father's son. He possesses a kind of manic energy and a brutal intelligence. Instead of relying solely on the fickle Norman lords, he does something revolutionary. He appeals to the English. He promises the local levies, the sturdy Saxon foot soldiers who still remember the trauma of the conquest, better laws, lighter taxes, and the right to hunt in their own woods. It is a lie, mostly, but it works. The English rally to the Norman king against the Norman barons, creating a strange, temporary unity born of necessity. The war becomes a series of sieges, a slow, grinding chess match played out against the backdrop of a wet English spring. The stone walls of Pevensey and Rochester castles are battered not just by catapults, but by hunger and disease. Rufus is relentless. He directs the siege engines personally, his voice booming over the ramparts, mocking his rebellious uncles and cousins. Meanwhile, Robert Curthose never arrives. He is delayed in Normandy, perhaps by bad weather, perhaps by his own lack of urgency, sipping wine while his supporters in England are starved into submission. This is the fatal flaw of the eldest brother. He has the charm to win allies, but not the discipline to keep them. One by one, the rebel castles surrender. The garrisons march out, expecting execution, but often finding mercy, or at least a heavy fine. Rufus knows that a king cannot rule a graveyard. He needs these barons, even the treacherous ones. In the shadows of this conflict, young Henry moves like a ghost. He uses his silver to buy the Cotentin Peninsula from his cash-strapped brother Robert, effectively becoming a tenant to his own sibling. He watches the war from the sidelines, learning the most valuable lesson of the age. Loyalty is expensive, but a well-timed betrayal is priceless. The rebellion fails, and William Rufus sits securely on the English throne, his red hair blazing under the crown, his court becoming a place of fashion, excess, and sharp wit. But the water remains wide. Normandy belongs to Robert, England to Rufus, and the sea between them is churned by constant intrigue. The brothers are not at peace. They are merely reloading. The separation of the realm creates a vacuum that pulls in every ambitious knight in Europe. Men looking to sell their swords to the highest bidder. And as the sun sets on the 11th century, the sensory world of the court begins to change. The rough wool and chainmail of the conquest giving way to long trailing sleeves, curled hair, and pointed shoes. A decadence that the older generation finds horrifying. We rest here for a moment, in the lull after the rebellion. The countryside is quiet again, save for the creaking of cartwheels and the distant bleating of sheep on the hills. The fires of the siege camps are essentially cold ash now, washed away by the gentle, relentless English rain. The brothers have retreated to their respective corners, Rufus to his hunting lodges in the New Forest, Robert to his comfortable ducal palace in Rouen, and Henry to his silent calculations. The realm is two halves of a whole, held together by tension, waiting for the next strike. Time flows like a river, sometimes sluggish and muddy, sometimes rushing over rapids. And we have now drifted past the year 1100 into the icy, glittering waters of November 1120. The decades between have seen the cards of history shuffled with violent precision. The red-headed William Rufus is dead, struck down by a stray arrow while hunting in the New Forest, a mysterious accident that conveniently allowed his younger brother Henry to ride hard for Winchester and seize the treasury before the blood was dry on the leaves. Robert Curthose, the eldest and most unfortunate brother, eventually lost everything. He now sits in a castle prison in Cardiff, where he will spend the next 28 years learning that a comfortable dungeon is still a dungeon. Henry V, the youngest, the scholar, the man who was left only silver, has done exactly what the conqueror prophesied. He has taken it all. He is now the master of both England and Normandy, a king known as the Lion of Justice, a man who organizes his realm with the cold efficiency of an accountant. He has 19 illegitimate children, evidence of a vigorous life, but only one legitimate son, William Adelin. This 17-year-old boy is the linchpin of the entire Anglo-Norman world. He is the golden thread holding the tapestry together. If he lives, the dynasty is secure. If he falls, the loom breaks. The scene is set at the harbour of Barfleur in Normandy. It is a crisp, freezing night, the kind where your breath hangs in the air like white smoke, and the stars look like shards of ice pinned to black velvet. The mood is euphoric. The king has successfully concluded a war with France. The barons have done homage to young William, and the court is preparing to sail back to England in triumph. In the harbour bobs a magnificent vessel, the White Ship. It is the medieval equivalent of a private jet. New, freshly caulked, painted white, and captained by Thomas Fitzstephen, whose father had piloted the conqueror's own ship across the Channel in 1066. Thomas begs the king for the honor of carrying him, but Henry, a creature of habit who dislikes changing his travel plans, declines. He has his own ship ready. Instead, he suggests that his son, William Adelin, and his entourage take the white ship. It is a fateful, chaotic switch, the kind of small decision that alters centuries. The white ship becomes a party boat. The passengers are the elite of the next generation. Earls, countesses, the king's own illegitimate children, the flower of the nobility. They are young, rich, and invincible. They bring on board casks of wine, and with the generosity of youth, they distribute it freely to the crew. Soon the sailors are roaring drunk, toasting the prince, and boasting that even though the king's ship has already departed, they can row fast enough to overtake him. It is a moment of hubris that feels almost scripted. Among the passengers is a man named Stephen of Blois, the king's nephew. He is a mild-mannered, pleasant aristocrat who, just before the ship casts off, complains of a stomach ailment, perhaps a sudden bout of diarrhea, which is rarely the stuff of heroic legends, but often the savior of lives. Historians still debate whether Stephen was truly ill, or if he looked at the drunken crew, the overcrowding, and the winter sea, and felt a pricking of his survival instinct. Regardless, he disembarks. He stands on the dock, wrapping his cloak tight against the chill, and watches the white ship push off into the dark. The vessel shoots out of the harbor, propelled by 50 oarsmen pulling with manic, drunken strength, trying to catch the king's lights on the horizon. They are moving dangerously fast in waters studded with hidden rocks. Less than a mile from shore, the white ship strikes the Quillibef rock on its port side. The sound is horrific, the cracking of seasoned timber echoing over the water like a thunderclap. The sea, freezing and merciless, rushes in. What happens next is a heartbreaking deconstruction of chivalry. The crew launches a small skiff, and the bodyguards wrestle Prince William into it. He is safe. They push away from the sinking wreck, rowing toward the silence of the open water. He has survived. The dynasty is intact. But then, over the screams of the dying, William hears a voice he recognizes. It is his half-sister, the Countess of Perche, crying out for help. In a world where brothers often killed brothers for land, William Adelin makes a choice that is startlingly human. He orders the skiff to turn back. He cannot leave her. As the small boat nears the wreck, the desperate, freezing passengers in the water see it as their only hope. They swarm it. Dozens of hands grab the gunwales, panicking, climbing over one another, heavy, wet wool dragging them down. The skiff capsizes under the weight of their terror. William Adelin, the future of England, vanishes beneath the black waves, pulled down by the very people he tried to save. The silence that follows is absolute. The ship is gone. 300 people, the heirs to the greatest estates in England and Normandy, are floating in the winter sea. The cold kills them quickly. Back on the shore, people hear a terrible sound carried on the wind, a collective scream that rises and cuts off abruptly. They assume it is just the revelry of the fleet, a drunken cheer, and they go to their beds. But in the water, only one man remains alive. He is not a jagged earl or a silken prince. He is a butcher from Rouen named Berold, who had come on board to collect a debt. He is wearing a rough, thick ramskin coat, the kind the nobles would have sneered at for its smell and crudeness. That cheap, warm coat saves his life. He clings to the tip of the mast, which protrudes just above the water, shivering through the long, freezing night, while the noble Captain Fitzstephen, surfacing and asking, "Where is the prince?" chooses to let himself drown rather than face the king. When morning breaks, the tide brings the wreckage to the feet of the fishermen. The news travels to England slowly, a whisper no one wants to deliver. King Henry is at his court, waiting for his son. When the messenger finally arrives, he cannot speak. He simply falls at the king's feet and weeps. When Henry understands what has happened, that William is dead, that the line is broken, he collapses to the floor in a faint. It is said that from that moment on, the Lion of Justice never smiled again. His grief is personal, but for the kingdom, it is political catastrophe. The succession is suddenly a void. Henry has a daughter, Matilda, but she is married to the Holy Roman Emperor in Germany. England has never been ruled by a woman. The idea is alien to the Norman barons, who view a queen not as a ruler, but as a wife to a ruler. Desperate to secure the future, Henry eventually recalls Matilda to England after her husband dies. He forces his barons to gather in the great halls, to kneel before this proud, imperious woman and swear a solemn oath to accept her as their lady and queen after his death. They swear it, their hands on holy relics, their voices murmuring the words. But their eyes are shifting, looking at one another, looking for an alternative. Among those swearing is Stephen of Blois, the man who got off the boat. He pledges his loyalty to his cousin Matilda, but he knows, as they all do, that an oath sworn under duress is like a sword made of glass, sharp but easily shattered. The white ship did not just sink a prince, it sank the certainty of the law. The waters have closed over the air, and as Henry's reign moves toward its twilight, the sharks begin to circle. The stage is set for a war, not of invasion, but of succession. A war between a cousin who was quick enough to survive the sea and a daughter who expects the land to obey her. The silence of the drowned prince is about to be broken by the clash of steel. The year is 1135, and the Lion of Justice finally closes his eyes in the deep woods of Normandy. King Henry France dies as he lived, surrounded by exhausted attendants and the consequences of his own appetites. The chroniclers tell us, with a mixture of solemnity and grim amusement, that the king died from a surfeit of lampreys, a heavy meal of eels that his physicians had strictly forbidden him to eat. It is a small, slippery end for a man who held nations in his grip, a reminder that even the mightiest monarch is only one bad dinner away from becoming an ancestor. As the news of his death spreads, it does not travel like a mourning procession. It travels like a starting gun. In Anjou, the rightful heir, Empress Matilda, is pregnant and embroiled in a petty squabble with her own husband, Geoffrey Plantagenet, a man so difficult that he seems to have considered arguing a recreational sport. She is slow to move, weighed down by her condition and the complex politics of the continent. But across the channel, in Boulogne, her cousin Stephen is watching the wind. Stephen is the favorite nephew, a man of immense charm, good manners, and the kind of easy smile that makes people forget he is ambitious. He does not hesitate. While Matilda is composing letters, Stephen is boarding a ship. He crosses the winter sea to England, riding hard for London, where the citizens, terrified of a power vacuum, throw open the gates and hail him as king. He rushes to Winchester, secures the royal treasury, and convinces the archbishop to crown him. It is a coup performed with the speed of a lightning strike. The barons, who had sworn their solemn oaths to Matilda, look at Stephen's fait accompli, look at his control of the money, and look at the prospect of being ruled by a woman married to a hated Angevin count. collectively, they shrug. They decide that an oath to a dead king is less binding than the favor of a living one. Stephen is crowned, and for a brief, shimmering moment, it seems he has gotten away with it. He is generous, perhaps too generous. He grants titles and lands to buy loyalty, scattering the royal domain like birdseed. But a crown bought is never truly owned. Matilda is not a woman to fade into the tapestry. In 1139, she lands on the English coast, not with an invasion force, but with a small retinue, walking onto the beach with the icy confidence of someone who knows the law is on her side. Thus begins the period known as the Anarchy, though historians often debate whether that term is fair. It wasn't total chaos. Rather, it was a privatization of government. As the central authority fractured, every local lord became a king in his own postcode. They built adulterine castles, unlicensed fortresses that sprang up like stone weeds on hilltops across the land. From these strongholds, they waged private wars on their neighbors, settling old scores under the banner of the Queen or the King. The Peterborough Chronicle captures the horror of this stalemate with a poetic bleakness. They hanged men by the feet and smoked them with foul smoke. They put knotted strings about their heads and twisted them until they went to the brain. It was a time, the monk wrote, when Christ and his saints slept. The war was not a line moving across a map. It was a patchwork of misery, a leopard skin of loyalty, where one village paid taxes to Stephen, and the next paid them to Matilda, and both were burned by the other side for their trouble. The conflict reaches a dramatic crescendo in 1141 at the Battle of Lincoln. Stephen, besieging Lincoln Castle, is surprised by Matilda's half-brother and chief general, Robert of Gloucester. The king's army flees, but Stephen refuses to run. There is a flash of the old conqueror's blood in him then. He stands his ground, wielding a battle axe with such ferocity that the chroniclers pause their dry recitation to applaud him. He swings until the axe handle snaps. He draws his sword and fights on until the blade shatters. Only then, surrounded and overwhelmed, does he surrender. He is taken in chains to Bristol, Matilda's stronghold. The war effectively ends. Stephen is a prisoner. Matilda is the Lady of the English. She travels to London to prepare for her coronation. The city is ready to receive her. The church is ready to anoint her. The crown is hers. But victory in a civil war requires a different skill set than winning a battle. Matilda has spent her adult life as an empress in Germany, accustomed to rigid obedience. She does not understand the messy, transactional nature of English politics. When the citizens of London ask for tax relief and the confirmation of their old laws, she treats them like rebellious serfs, demanding money with a haughtiness that sucks the air out of the room. It is a fatal misreading of the room. The Londoners, who had opened their gates to Stephen's charm, slam them in Matilda's face. A mob rises, chasing the empress out of the city just hours before her coronation feast is set to be served. She flees to Oxford, the crown slipping through her fingers because she demanded it rather than negotiated for it. The pendulum swings back with cruel irony. In the chaos of her retreat, her greatest general, her brother Robert of Gloucester, is captured by Stephen's queen, who, confusingly, is also named Matilda. Now both sides hold the other's most valuable piece. The empress holds the king, the queen holds the general. A negotiation follows, cold and mathematical. There is no other option. They agree to a straight swap, the king for the earl, Stephen is released and returns to his throne, a little more weary, a little less charming. Robert returns to his sister's side. The pieces are reset to the start of the board. The Battle of Lincoln, the capture, the Ner coronation. It was all for nothing. The war must go on, and go on it does, grinding down the years. The conflict settles into a rhythm of sieges and skirmishes that bleed the realm white. The ultimate symbol of this futility comes in 1142, when Stephen traps Matilda in Oxford Castle during a harsh winter. The snow is deep, the river frozen solid. Inside the walls, supplies are dwindling, and surrender seems inevitable. But one night, Matilda does something that blurs the line between history and folklore. She dresses herself entirely in white. White cloak, white tunic, white veil. Under the cover of a blizzard, she is lowered from the walls on a rope. She walks right through Stephen's siege lines, a ghost moving against the snow, invisible to the sentries who are blowing on their frozen hands to keep warm. She walks across the frozen River Thames, the ice cracking ominously under her boots, and escapes into the night to fight for another decade. It is a story of incredible daring, yet it changes nothing fundamental. Stephen cannot crush her. She cannot depose him. The barons, realizing that a weak king and a distracted rival mean no one is watching the till, stop trying to win the war and start trying to profit from it. They play both sides, expanding their own lands, while the two protagonists age and tire. England becomes a grey place, a land of damp Mott and Bailey castles and unharvested fields. The fire of the Civil War burns down to embers, not because of peace, but because of exhaustion. Stephen is a king in name, ruling a fraction of a realm. Matilda is a queen in exile in her own country, holding the West, but unable to take the East. They are trapped in a dance that neither can lead and neither can leave. And while they fight over the present, a new player enters the stage, watching from across the sea. Matilda's son, Henry Plantagenet, is growing up. He is not like his mother, rigid and proud, nor like Stephen, soft and indecisive. He is something else entirely. Red-haired, freckled, bursting with energy, and possessed of a temper that can seemingly melt stone. He waits in Normandy, listening to the reports of the stalemate, understanding that the generation of the parents has failed. The war of the cousins is ending. The war of the sons is about to begin. The grey, stagnant mists of the anarchy do not linger. They are blown away by a sudden, violent gale from the south. The year is 1154, and Stephen is dead, his tired heart finally giving out, leaving the stage clear for the boy who waited in the wings. Henry Plantagenet, now King Henry II, storms onto the throne with the energy of a man who fears that standing still will cause him to catch fire. He is 21 years old, stocky, red-haired, freckled, and possessed of a terrifying vitality. Chronicles tell us that his courtiers lived in a state of perpetual exhaustion because the king refused to sit down, even during business, and would decide on a whim to move the entire court, files, furniture, bishops, and dogs, 50 miles before breakfast. He is not merely the King of England. He is the master of an empire that stretches from the rain-soaked moors of Scotland to the sun-baked foothills of the Pyrenees. Through his mother Matilda, he holds England and Normandy. From his father Geoffrey, he holds Anjou, and through his brilliant, scandalous marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine, he holds the vast, wine-rich south of France. It is the greatest accumulation of power in Europe, a colossus that overshadows the King of France himself. Yet, in the heart of this empire, there is a rot. It is not political, it is genetic. There is a legend whispered about the Plantagenet bloodline, a story that the family themselves told with a kind of dark pride. They claim descent from Melusine, a water demon disguised as a woman who flew out of a church window when forced to witness the Mass. From the devil we came, the family motto went, and to the devil we will return. It is a poetic explanation for a biological reality. The Plantagenets are a family of geniuses and narcissists, too brilliant to fail, but too volatile to succeed together. Henry and Eleanor are the power couple of the 12th century. He the tireless administrator who creates the common law, she the patron of troubadours, and the most desirable heiress in Christendom. Together, they produce a brood of sons who are destined to tear the world apart: Henry, Richard, Geoffrey, and John. They are the devil's brood, golden eaglets, who grow up watching their father rule everything and deciding that they would like to have a turn, preferably immediately. The tragedy of Henry II is that he is a magnificent king, but a disastrous father. He loves his children with a possessive, suffocating intensity, but he treats them like employees he cannot quite bring himself to promote. He gives them titles. Young Henry is crowned King of England, while his father is still alive, a practice meant to secure the succession. But he gives them no power. He gives them revenues, but controls the purse strings. He gives them castles, but keeps his own castellans in charge. He creates a situation of exquisite frustration. He raises lions, pulls their teeth, and is surprised when they learn to bite with their gums. The tension snaps in 1173. It begins, as these things often do, with a dinner table argument that escalates into treason. Henry II attempts to give a few castles to his youngest son John, his favorite, nicknamed Lackland, because he was born too late to inherit anything. The eldest son, the young King Henry, explodes. He is 18, handsome, popular, and deeply in debt because he tries to live like a king on a prince's allowance. He refuses to cede the castles. He flees his father's court in the middle of the night, riding hard for Paris, where the King of France, Henry II's ex-brother-in-law and bitter rival, welcomes him with open arms. It is a shock, but Henry II assumes it is a tantrum. Then the news worsens. His majestic sons, Richard, then 16, and Geoffrey, 14, have also vanished, slipping away to join their brother. And then comes the blow that truly breaks the king's heart. His wife, Eleanor, has joined them. She has been caught by Henry's soldiers on the road, dressed in men's clothing, attempting to ride to the rebel camp. The Great Revolt of 1173-1174 is not a political uprising. It is a divorce proceeding fought with armies. The scope of the betrayal is breathtaking. The sons of Henry II rally the barons who have chafed under the king's strict laws. They promise tax breaks. They promise freedom. They promise a return to the good old days of weak kingship. The war erupts on multiple fronts: in Normandy, in Brittany, in the north of England, where the Scots invade, sensing blood in the water. Henry II, the man who built the empire, now has to ride the length of it to save it from his own children. It is here that we see the terrifying competence of the man. Confronted with the ruin of his life's work, Henry does not despair. He moves. He marches his mercenaries, brutal professionals who are loyal only to gold, with such speed that his enemies claim he must fly. He smashes the rebels in France, then crosses the Channel to England. But before he fights, he does something extraordinary. He walks barefoot to Canterbury Cathedral, the site where his friend turned enemy, Thomas Becket, had been murdered by Henry's knights 3 years earlier. In front of the tomb, the King of England kneels in the dust, strips off his shirt, and allows the monks to whip him. It is a masterstroke of medieval theatre. By doing penance, he reclaims the moral high ground. He is no longer the tyrant. He is the humble servant of God, beset by ungrateful children. God, or perhaps luck, seems to listen. On the very day Henry completes his penance, his generals in the north capture the King of Scotland in the mist at Alnwick. The rebellion collapses like a tent with the pole removed. The sons, realizing they cannot beat their father in the field, come crawling back. The scene of their reconciliation is one of the most awkward family reunions in history. The young king, Richard and Geoffrey, prostrate themselves on the ground before their father, begging for mercy. Henry, weeping, raises them up and gives them the kiss of peace. He is generous to a fault. He increases their allowances. He gives them more independence. He wants desperately to believe that they have learned their lesson. But there is one person he does not forgive. Eleanor of Aquitaine is not given the kiss of peace. She is given a tower. Henry imprisons her, first in Chinon and then in various castles in England, where she will remain for the next 16 years, a queen in a gilded cage. The silence of her confinement, a constant reminder to the sons of the price of failure. Historians still argue about the true nature of this family dynamic, whether Henry was a tyrant who drove his family away, or a visionary whose sons were simply too greedy to understand his grand design. But the emotional truth is clearer. The trust is gone. The dinner tables of the Plantagenets are now quiet battlefields. Henry II watches his sons with narrowed eyes, wondering when, not if, they will strike again. The sons watch the father, counting the grey hairs in his beard, waiting for the lion to die so the cubs can finally eat. The War of 1173 ends without a change in the crown, but it changes the soul of the dynasty. The devil's brood has tasted blood, and they have found that the most satisfying enemy is not a stranger, but the man who gave them life. The empire is safe for the moment, held together by the iron will of one aging man. But the cracks in the foundation are widening. In the silence of the royal chambers, the king works late into the night, the scratch of his quill the only sound, while in the distance, Richard, the golden warrior, begins to sharpen his sword for a different kind of war. The peace is a lie. It is merely the intermission before the tragedy resumes. To be a king is to hold the world in your hands. To be a young king is to hold only air. We find ourselves now in the early 1180s, in the suffocating limbo that Henry II has created for his eldest son. Henry, the young king, is now nearly 30 years old. He has been crowned, anointed, and hailed as joint King of England, yet he possesses less actual authority than the lowliest bailiff in the shires. He is a golden ornament, a man bred for a purpose he is forbidden to fulfill. He travels from tournament to tournament, the superstar of the medieval circuit, spending money he doesn't have, surrounded by a retinue of knights who whisper that his father will live forever and that his youth is being stolen day by day. He is the most popular man in Europe, handsome, affable, generous to a fault, but popularity does not pay the wages of mercenaries. In the south, his brother Richard is carving out a terrifying reputation as the Duke of Aquitaine, crushing rebellions with an iron fist. In Brittany, his brother Geoffrey is proving to be a slippery, intelligent ruler. Only the young king has nothing but a title. The resentment, which had cooled after the rebellion of 1173, begins to boil again, heated by the friction of idleness. The tension explodes in 1183, not in England, but in the sun-baked, dusty landscapes of the Limousin in France. The family quarrel shifts from sons versus father to brother versus brother, a deadly triangulation of jealousy. The young king demands that Richard pay him homage for Aquitaine. Richard, who has spent years pacifying the duchy with his own blood and sweat, refuses with a characteristic roar of contempt. He is not a man to bend the knee to a brother whose only battlefield experience is the mock combat of the tournament lists. Henry II, trying to mediate, finds himself in the crossfire. The young king, furious and humiliated, joins forces with the wily Geoffrey. Together, they invite the barons of Aquitaine, who hate Richard's harsh rule, to rise up. It is a civil war condensed into a family feud, fought over the inheritance before the testator has even died. The War of 1183 is a messy, sordid affair. It lacks the grand ideological sweep of the anarchy. This is a street fight between siblings. The young king and Geoffrey wage a campaign of chaos, burning villages and seizing castles, trying to corner Richard. But Richard is a genius of war, a man who seems to think in siege angles and cavalry charges. He holds his ground. The father, Henry II, reluctantly joins Richard, besieging the castle of Limoges, where his rebel sons are holed up. The situation is tragic and absurd. The most powerful king in Christendom is outside the walls, dodging arrows shot by his own children. On one occasion, the king rides too close to the ramparts to negotiate, and a crossbow bolt pierces his coat. Another time, a horse is shot out from under his companion. The sons have lost all reverence for the crown. They see only the man standing in their way. But the war turns, not on strategy, but on the invisible enemies of the medieval camp: heat, dysentery, and guilt. The young king is running out of money. To pay his routiers, the brutal mercenaries who are the only ones willing to fight for him, he commits a sacrilege that shocks the chroniclers. He marches his troops to the holy shrine of Rocamadour, a pilgrimage site dedicated to the Virgin Mary, and loots it. He strips the gold, the gems, the offerings of the faithful. It is the act of a desperate man, a signal that his moral compass has been smashed by ambition. As he rides away from the violated shrine, the summer heat seems to turn against him. He falls ill with a violent fever, perhaps dysentery, perhaps, as the monks whisper, the wrath of the Virgin. He retreats to a small house in Martel, his body burning, his strength evaporating. The golden boy of Europe, the star of the tournament, is suddenly a frighteningly frail figure, shivering under wool blankets. Realizing he is dying, a wave of crushing remorse hits him. He sends a message to his father, who is still besieging him a few miles away, begging him to come. Henry II, the man who has forgiven so much, hesitates. His advisors warn him it is a trap, that the son who shot at him will surely kill him if he enters the room. The king listens to them. He does not go. Instead, he sends a ring, a sapphire signet, as a token of forgiveness. When the messenger arrives, the young king presses the ring to his lips and weeps. The death scene of Henry the young king is a piece of theatre as dramatic as his life. Determined to die as a penitent, he orders his attendants to strip him naked and drag him by a rope around his neck onto a bed of ash laid out on the floor. It is a symbol of utter humility, a rejection of the royalty he chased but never truly caught. He dies there, on the floor, in the dust, at the age of 28. When the news reaches Henry II's camp, the king faints 3 times. When he wakes, his grief is a terrible, howling thing. He ignores the political reality that his most dangerous enemy is gone, and feels only the loss of his child. "He cost me much," the king says through his tears, "but I wish he had lived to cost me more." The death of the young king sucks the oxygen out of the rebellion. Geoffrey, without his figurehead brother, abandons the fight. The castles open their gates. The mercenaries disperse. But the silence that falls over the Angevin Empire is heavy with a new problem. The board has been reset in a way no one wanted. The heir is dead. The next in line is Richard, the Lionheart, the warrior, the favorite of his mother Eleanor, but a stranger to his father. And behind Richard stands John, the baby of the family, watching with wide, calculating eyes. Historians often debate whether the young king would have made a good ruler. He was charming, certainly, but charm is not policy. His death resolves the immediate war, but destabilizes the future. The structure of the inheritance is now unbalanced. Richard expects to be named the heir to England, Normandy, and Anjou, but he refuses to give up Aquitaine to John. He wants it all. The father, weary and grieving, refuses to confirm Richard as the undisputed heir, perhaps fearing that Richard will become as dangerous as the young king was. The family is not healed. It is merely scarred. The tragedy of 1183 serves as a grim prelude to the final act of Henry II's reign. The king has buried his eldest son, but he has not buried the curse of his bloodline. The trust between father and surviving sons is non-existent. In the quiet of the royal chapel, Henry II prays for the soul of the boy on the bed of ash, while in the south, Richard rides back to his duchy, his face set in stone, knowing that the only way to secure his rights is to keep his sword loose in the scabbard. The brothers at war have become a war of attrition, and the old lion is running out of time. The old lion, Henry II, dies in July 1189 at Chinon, whispering, "Shame, shame on a conquered king," as the heat of a French summer settles over his defeated body. He has been hunted to his death by his own son Richard and his sly ally, King Philip Augustus of France. When Richard comes to view the corpse, it is said that the body bleeds from the nose, a medieval sign that the murderer is present. Richard the Lionheart does not weep. He is 31 years old, a man of terrifying physical power and absolute certainty. He has what he wanted, the crown, but Richard has no interest in the tedious business of administration, of listening to sheriffs complain about sheep stealing or boundary disputes. For him, England is not a home, it is a bank vault. He has taken the cross to fight for Jerusalem, and he treats his new kingdom as a funding mechanism for his soul's salvation. He puts everything up for sale: earldoms, sheriffdoms, castles, offices. He jokes with a laugh that rattles the windows of Westminster. "I would sell London itself if I could find a buyer." In months, he drains the country of silver and sails east, leaving behind a vacuum where a king should be. Into this vacuum steps the shadow, his brother John. John is 22, short, dark-haired, and possessed of a suspicious, restless intelligence. He has been given a generous package of lands, the Count of Morton, Lord of Ireland, holding vast estates in the west of England, but he has been strictly forbidden to enter the country while Richard is away. It is a naive command. Richard assumes that an oath will hold John back. But John is a Plantagenet. He views an oath as merely a pause in the conversation. As soon as Richard is fighting Saladin in the dust of the Holy Land, John is in England, setting up a court that acts like a magnet for every disgruntled noble in the realm. He presents himself not as a usurper, but as a concerned alternative. While Richard's regents, men like the arrogant William Longchamp, alienate the barons with their high-handedness, John smiles, listens, and promises. He begins to look, walk, and act like a king in waiting. He seizes castles, not by siege, but by charm and intimidation. He builds a state within a state. The tension shifts from political maneuvering to high-stakes treason in 1192. Rumors drift back from the east. Richard is struggling, the crusade is failing, Richard is sick. And then, the silence breaks with a shock. Richard has been captured. On his way home, disguised as a humble cook in a turnspit's kitchen, the Lionheart was recognized by his enemies in Vienna and thrown into a dungeon by the Holy Roman Emperor. The news hits England like a hammer blow. The king is in chains. For John, this is not a tragedy. It is the opportunity of a lifetime. He immediately crosses to France and forms an alliance with Philip Augustus. He does the unthinkable. He offers to give away parts of Richard's continental empire to Philip in exchange for support in seizing the English throne. He returns to England with a force of mercenaries and declares that Richard is dead. It is a bold, breathless lie. He demands the kingdom. But the English barons, for all their quarrels, are not ready to trade a hero for a liar. They refuse to believe the king is dead. They barricade the castles against John. The country hangs in a state of suspended animation. A kingdom with a locked-up king and a lying prince at the gate. Then comes the ransom. The emperor demands 150,000 marks for Richard's release, a sum so astronomical it is equivalent to twice the annual income of the English crown. It is a price designed to bankrupt a nation. John, seeing his window closing, plays his final desperate card. He sends a secret message to the emperor, offering to pay him more to keep Richard in prison forever. It is the brotherly betrayal, stripped of all pretense. He is willing to buy his brother's life sentence. But the emperor, swayed by the Pope and the sheer volume of silver arriving from loyal England, refuses. The ransom is paid. The Saladin tithe and the melting down of church plate have done their work. In early 1194, a message arrives from Philip of France to John, a single line that has echoed down the centuries as a warning of coming violence. Look to yourself. The devil is loose. Richard lands at Sandwich in March 1194. He does not come as a broken captive. He comes as a wrathful god. The sheer charisma of the man sweeps the board clean. The castles that held out for John surrender the moment Richard's banner appears on the horizon. The rebellion evaporates. John's supporters vanish into the woodwork. John himself is cornered. The reunion of the brothers takes place in Normandy. John, terrified, stripped of his allies, falls to his knees and weeps, begging for his life. He expects the axe. But Richard, looking down at this smaller, trembling version of himself, does something unexpected. He laughs. He lifts John up and says, with a mixture of pity and condescension, "Think no more of it, John. You are only a child who has had evil counselors. It is a stinging forgiveness." John is 27 years old, a grown man. Yet Richard dismisses his treason as a nursery tantrum. He lets him live. He even lets him keep some lands, though he strips him of his castles. Historians often debate why Richard was so lenient. Was it brotherly love? Or was it arrogance? The belief that John was simply too incompetent to be a real threat. Perhaps it was a pragmatic realization that a caged brother is a martyr, while a free, humiliated brother is just a joke. For the next 5 years, the dynamic shifts. John becomes Richard's obedient deputy. He fights for Richard in France. He suppresses rebellions. He acts the part of the loyal lieutenant. The shadow learns to walk in step with the lion. But the resentment does not disappear. It goes underground. John watches as Richard spends his final years in a ceaseless grinding war to defend Normandy against France, building the mighty Chateau Gaillard, bleeding the treasury dry again. England is tired. The glory of the crusade has faded into the reality of high taxes and empty barns. The hero king is rarely seen. He is a legend that costs too much to maintain. And then, the random cruelty of the medieval world strikes again. In 1199, Richard is besieging a minor castle in Chalus-Chabrol, a petty squabble over a pot of Roman gold found by a peasant. He rides too close to the walls without armor, perhaps feeling invincible after surviving Saladin and the Emperor. A lone crossbowman, a boy, some say, shielding himself with a frying pan, takes a shot. The bolt strikes Richard in the shoulder. It is not a fatal wound, but the surgeon who removes it butchers the job. Gangrene sets in. The Lionheart, the greatest warrior of his age, rots to death in a bed, his body betraying him where his enemies could not. As he lies dying, he names his heir. He has no legitimate children. He could choose his nephew Arthur of Brittany, the son of his deceased brother Geoffrey. Arthur has a strong legal claim, but on his deathbed, Richard chooses the brother he forgave. He names John. The section closes as the shadow finally becomes the substance. John stands by the body of the brother who overshadowed his entire life. He is now King John. He has the crown, the robes, the treasury, and the empire. But he also inherits the exhaustion of the realm and the deep, silent suspicion of the barons who remember his treachery. The lion is dead, and the wolves are already looking at the new shepherd, noting that he flinches at shadows. The civil war of the brothers is over, but the war of the king against his own subjects is about to begin. The sensory shift is palpable, from the bright, hard trumpet blasts of Richard's reign to the murmuring, ink-stained paranoia of John's. The sun has set on the age of heroes. The long night of the politicians has arrived. The year is 1215, and the realm of England feels less like a kingdom and more like a prison yard where the inmates are rioting. King John has been on the throne for 16 years, and in that time, he has achieved a near miraculous feat. He has united almost every faction of society in absolute hatred of him. He is a man of nervous energy and sudden silences, a king who travels constantly, not to dispense justice, but to escape his own paranoia. He trusts no one, and in return, no one trusts him. He has lost Normandy to the French king, an unimaginable catastrophe that earned him the nickname Soft Sword. To win it back, he has squeezed England until it screams. He has taxed the widows, fined the Jews, seized the estates of barons on flimsy pretexts, and starved the wife and son of his former friend, William de Braouse, to death in the dungeons of Corfe Castle. A horror that sent a chill through every noble family in the land. The myth of the divine king is crumbling. In its place is a man who looks very much like a gangster running a protection racket. We find ourselves in the damp, grassy meadow of Runnymede, beside the River Thames. It is June, but the air is tense, heavy with the threat of violence. On one side stands the king's retinue, small, sour-faced, heavily armed. On the other stands the army of the rebel barons, the army of God and Holy Church. They are not asking for favors, they are making demands. They have drafted a document, a Great Charter, or Magna Carta, which is essentially a restraining order against the crown. It demands that the king stop stealing wood, stop kidnapping heiresses, stop selling justice, and start obeying the law. John signs it. He smiles as the wax is pressed. He chats with the men he hates. But the moment he returns to his chambers at Windsor, the mask slips. Chronicles say he threw himself on the floor, gnawing on sticks of wood, in an uncontrollable rage, screaming that he had been made a slave of 25 kings, referring to the council of 25 barons appointed to enforce the charter. He has no intention of keeping his word. He immediately sends a messenger to the Pope, claiming he signed under duress. The Pope, now John's ally, after a previous reconciliation, agrees and annuls the charter, declaring it shameful and demeaning, invalid forever. The war is back on. The Barons' War erupts with a ferocity that makes the earlier struggles look like skirmishes. This is not a dynastic squabble. It is a fight for survival. The barons, realizing John will kill them one by one if he wins, take the nuclear option. They invite Prince Louis of France, the son of Philip Augustus, to invade England and take the crown. It is a stunning betrayal. The English nobility would rather have a French king than an English tyrant. Louis lands in Kent in 1216. He marches to London, where he is welcomed with cheers and bells. The citizens of London, the barons of the realm, and the King of Scotland all pay homage to him at St. Paul's. John is losing his kingdom, not by inches, but by miles. John retreats. He becomes a king on the run, moving his court through the loyal west and north, burning the lands of his enemies as he goes. He is a whirlwind of spite. In the autumn of 1216, he attempts to cross the Wash, a treacherous estuary in East Anglia, where the tide rushes in with the speed of a galloping horse. He makes it across, but his baggage train does not. The wagons carrying the crown jewels, the royal regalia, and the king's gold sink into the quicksand and the swirling waters. It is a symbolic loss that feels like a judgment. The king has lost his legitimacy, his capital, and now his crown. Sick with dysentery, terrified of poison, and broken by the loss of his treasure, John arrives at Newark Castle. The end is unheroic. He eats a meal of peaches and cider, or perhaps poisoned plums, as the rumors go, and his body finally shuts down. As the wind howls around the castle towers in October 1216, King John dies. He leaves behind a country in flames, a French prince sitting in London, and an heir, his son Henry, who is a frightened boy of 9 years old. By all laws of political gravity, the Plantagenet dynasty should end here. The momentum is with Louis. The barons have rejected John. Why should they accept his son? But the death of a tyrant changes everything. The hate was personal. With John gone, the barons suddenly look at Louis of France, a foreigner, a man who will likely bring his own French favorites to rule them. And then they look at the little boy Henry. They see innocence. A child cannot be a tyrant. A child can be molded. The greatest night in England William Marshall, an elderly warrior who has served 4 kings and whose loyalty is the stuff of legend, steps forward. He takes charge of the boy king. In a hurried, almost pathetic ceremony at Gloucester Cathedral, they crown Henry I. They have no crown, it is lost in the wash. So they use a simple gold circlet, perhaps a bracelet from his mother's jewelry box. It is a fragile, improvisational moment. William Marshall then does something brilliant. He reissues the Magna Carta in the boy king's name. He tells the rebels, "You fought against John's tyranny. John is dead. His son promises to obey the laws you wrote. Why fight a child to install a Frenchman?" The argument splinters the rebel cause. The war shifts from a crusade against a monster to a defense of a rightful heir. The climax comes at the Battle of Lincoln in 1217, a chaotic street fight within the walled city. William Marshall, 70 years old, leads the charge personally, hammering at the French and rebel knights until they break. It is known as the Fair of Lincoln because of the immense amount of loot captured. The French are defeated. Prince Louis eventually negotiates a peace and goes home. The boy Henry III is safe. The dynasty survives. But the cost is a permanent change in the nature of kingship. The Magna Carta, once a failed peace treaty, becomes the bedrock of the new reign. The king is no longer absolute. He is a partner, however unwilling, with his subjects. The Civil War has saved the crown by forcing it to bow. We leave this section with the image of the young King Henry, a child in oversized robes, sitting on a throne that was almost burned for firewood, surrounded by the very men who had fought his father. The storm has passed, but the air has changed. The monarchy has been humbled, and the long, slow lesson has begun. A king who fights his own people fights a war he can never truly win. The silence of the night returns, but it is the silence of exhaustion, not peace. The boy king has become an old man, and the frightened child, crowned with a bracelet, is now a builder of cathedrals, obsessed with beauty in a world that prefers strength. We have drifted into the middle of the 13th century, the long, strange reign of Henry III. He is not a tyrant like his father John. He is something more baffling to the medieval mind, a connoisseur. He spends his days supervising the reconstruction of Westminster Abbey, fussing over the shade of gold leaf for a saint's halo, and the texture of velvet for a cope, while his barons stand in the background, tapping the hilts of their swords and checking their pocket watches. Henry is a man of soft edges, pious, emotional, and deeply susceptible to influence. He treats the treasury like a personal gift shop, lavishing money on his wife's relatives from Savoy and his own half-brothers from Lusignan. Foreigners who flock to the English court like seagulls to a fishing boat. The English nobles call them aliens, watching with grinding teeth as these newcomers marry the richest heiresses and take the best castles. The king does not see the problem. He believes that because he is the king, his friends are the kingdom's friends. It is a fatal confusion of the personal and the political, a mistake that turns the dinner table into a battlefield once again. The atmosphere shifts from irritation to crisis in the year 1258. It is a year when the sky itself seems to turn against the Plantagenets. A massive volcanic eruption in the tropics, unknown to the chroniclers but recorded in the ice cores of the world, throws a veil of ash into the stratosphere. The sun turns pale, the crops rot in the fields, the rain never stops. Famine stalks the muddy roads of England. People are dying in the ditches, their mouths stained green from eating grass. In the midst of this apocalyptic gloom, Henry III demands a massive tax. He has committed to a bizarre foreign policy scheme to buy the crown of Sicily for his younger son, a project the Pope sold him on credit. The barons look at the starving peasants, the empty barns, and the king's invoice for a theoretical kingdom in the Mediterranean, and they finally say no. 7 great magnates march into the royal hall at Westminster. They are fully armed, their chainmail jingling with a heavy, purposeful sound. They leave their swords at the door, but the threat is as loud as a shout. Leading them is a figure who dominates this era, Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester. Simon is a paradox, a Frenchman who has become the champion of the English, a royal favorite who has become the king's nightmare. He is married to the king's sister, Eleanor, yet he speaks to Henry with the harsh, biting candor of a prophet. Historians still argue whether Simon was the first visionary democrat or merely an opportunist with a messiah complex. He was a man who wore a hair shirt next to his skin to mortify his flesh, yet insisted on being served with the pomp of a duke. He possessed a terrifying charisma, the kind that makes men willing to die for a cause they don't fully understand. The confrontation leads to the Provisions of Oxford, a document far more radical than the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta merely asked the king to obey the law. The Provisions effectively fired him. They set up a council of 15 barons to run the government. For a few years, the monarchy is suspended in all but name. But a committee cannot rule a kingdom. The barons squabble. The king maneuvers. Henry III, borrowing a move from his father, gets the Pope to absolve him of his oaths. The unity fractures. Simon de Montfort, disgusted by the compromise of his peers, leaves for France, then returns. His conviction hardened into steel. The civil war that follows is known as the Second Barons' War, but it feels like a religious revival. Simon's soldiers sew white crosses onto their tunics. They believe they are fighting for God and the community of the realm. The climax comes at the Battle of Lewes in 1264. Simon is outnumbered 2-1. He spends the night before the battle in prayer, while the royalists spend it drinking and gambling. At dawn, Simon's army charges down from the heights. It is a shock victory. The king's son, Prince Edward, tall, long-legged, furious, leads a cavalry charge that smashes Simon's wing. But Edward makes the classic mistake of youth. He chases the fleeing enemy for miles, lost in the red mist of the kill. When he returns exhausted, he finds the battle lost. His father, the king, has been beaten and has taken refuge in a priory. Simon de Montfort captures them both. For a year, Simon is the uncrowned King of England. He summons a parliament, the first to include not just knights, but ordinary burgesses from the towns, planting a seed of democracy that will take centuries to bloom. But power sours him. He becomes arrogant, hoarding the loot for his own family. His allies drift away. The young Prince Edward escapes captivity by pretending to race horses against his guards until their mounts are tired, then galloping away on a fresh steed. The end is written in lightning. In August 1265, at Evesham, Prince Edward traps Simon de Montfort. The prince has learned from his defeat. He is no longer a hothead, but a cold, tactical killer. He pins Simon's army against a loop in the River Avon. As the armies form up, the sky turns black. A summer thunderstorm of biblical intensity breaks over the field. thunder shaking the ground, lightning flashing off the wet armor. "By the arm of St. James," Simon says, watching the prince's banners advance. "They come on well. They learned that from me." He knows he is going to die. He urges his friends to flee, but they refuse. The Battle of Evesham is not a fight. It is an execution. The royalists are not interested in ransom. They want to erase the idea that a subject can rule a king. Simon is surrounded. His horse is killed. He fights on foot, a tall, grey-haired warrior, hacking at the wall of steel closing in. He is struck down, stabbed, and hacked to pieces. The mutilation of his body is shocking, even by medieval standards. His head, hands, and feet are cut off and sent as grisly gifts to different parts of the realm. The storm passes. The river runs red. Henry III is restored to his throne, a shaken, fragile figure who just wants to go back to his abbey and his prayers. But the true power has shifted to his son. Prince Edward, soon to be Edward I, has been forged in the fire of civil war. He has learned that a king must be a terrifying thing, not a gentle connoisseur. The brothers at war in this generation were brothers-in-law Henry and Simon, bound by marriage and torn apart by ideology. Simon is dead, buried in secret by monks who revere him as a saint. But his ghost lingers. The idea that the king is answerable to the realm has been planted in the soil, watered with blood. It will grow. But for now, the crown is safe, held in the iron grip of a prince who will never again let a baron tell him what to do. The candles in Westminster Abbey flicker in the draught, illuminating the golden shrine of Edward the Confessor, a peaceful saint watching over a violent land. The old king sits in the gloom, listening to the rain, safe at last, but knowing that the silence was bought at a terrible price. The hammer has fallen silent. Edward the Flintstones, the terrifying Hammer of the Scots, is dead, and the iron grip he held on England relaxes into the soft, uncertain hands of his son. We enter now the tragedy of Edward II, a story that plays out less like a war chronicle and more like a domestic noir, a tale of obsessional love, spousal revenge, and a crown lost in the bedroom. Edward II is a baffling figure to his contemporaries. He is tall, strong, and looks every inch a Plantagenet king, yet he has no interest in the grim business of kingship. He dislikes tournaments. He loathes war. He prefers the company of ditch diggers, thatchers, and boatmen, finding peace in manual labor and the rhythm of the countryside. But most of all, he prefers the company of Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight with a sharp tongue and a flamboyant style that sets the teeth of the English barons on edge. The relationship is intense, exclusive, and politically suicidal. At Edward's own coronation, he ignores his new bride, the 12-year-old Isabella of France, to sit and gossip with Gaveston, who is wearing royal purple and pearls that outshine the Queen's own jewels. It is a public humiliation, a signal that the king's heart is not in the marriage bed nor in the council chamber, but in the private, whispered world he shares with his favorite. The reign becomes a cycle of crisis. The barons, furious at being shut out, force the king to exile Gaveston. The king recalls him. The barons hunt Gaveston down and execute him on Blacklow Hill, running him through with swords. Edward II does not fight back. He weeps. He collects his favorite's body and buries it. But he never buries the grudge. He finds new favorites, the Despensers, father and son, who are far more dangerous than Gaveston. They are not merely vain. They are rapacious. They build a mafia state using the king's authority to seize lands, rig courts, and terrorize the nobility. The king, blinded by his need for emotional closeness, lets them rule. He has forgotten the lesson of his ancestors. The crown must be a shield for the realm, not a weapon for a clique. Enter Isabella. History remembers her as the she-wolf of France, a moniker that suggests a monster. But for years, she was the model medieval queen, patient, diplomatic, bearing 4 children, and trying to mediate between her stubborn husband and his angry barons. But patience has a breaking point. By 1325, the Despensers have turned the king against her. They confiscate her lands, fire her French servants, and treat her as an enemy alien. When a diplomatic crisis arises with France, Edward sends Isabella to Paris to negotiate with her brother, the French king. It is the mistake of a man who assumes his wife is furniture, useful, silent, and incapable of movement. Isabella crosses the channel. She concludes the treaty. And then she refuses to come back. "I feel that marriage is a joining of a man and a woman," she writes in a letter that surely chilled Edward's blood, "and not of a man and a man." She declares she will not return until the Despensers are removed. In Paris, the queen becomes a revolutionary. She gathers around her the exiles of Edward's reign, a court of the dispossessed. And she takes a lover. Roger Mortimer is a rugged marcher lord who had escaped from the Tower of London by drugging the guards and climbing out on a rope ladder. He is everything Edward is not: decisive, martial, and ruthless. Together, the queen and the outlaw weave a plot that is breathtaking in its audacity. They will not just negotiate, they will invade. They betroth Isabella's son, the young Prince Edward, to a Countess of Hainault to pay for mercenaries. In September 1326, they land in Orwell, Suffolk. They have a tiny army, but they have a massive weapon: the hatred of the realm for the Despensers. The invasion is a procession. The king's support evaporates like mist. The great earls ride to join the queen. The Londoners rise up, dragging the king's treasurer out of St. Paul's Cathedral and beheading him in the street. Edward II and the Despensers flee west, racing toward Wales, hunted by the very woman who once shared the throne. They are captured in November, caught in the rain-soaked woods of Neath. The Despensers are executed with horrific pageantry, but the king is a problem. He is the Lord's anointed. You cannot put a king on trial. Or can you? Isabella and Mortimer invent a new constitutional mechanism. They summon a parliament and charge the king with incompetence. They accuse him of losing Scotland, of destroying the church, of failing to follow good counsel. The scene of the abdication is one of the most pathetic in English history. At Kenilworth Castle, a deputation of bishops and barons confronts the prisoner king. Edward II, dressed in black, enters the chamber and faints at the sight of them. When he is revived, he listens to the list of his failures. He weeps uncontrollably. He admits that he is unworthy to reign and asks only that his son be allowed to succeed him. The steward of the household snaps his staff of office in two, the symbolic breaking of the bond of allegiance. Edward II is now merely Edward of Caernarfon, a private citizen in a stone cell. What happens next is shrouded in the darkest rumors of the Middle Ages. The deposed king is moved to Berkeley Castle, a grim fortress near the Severn estuary. He is kept in a secure room, the air thick with the damp of the marshes. And there, in September 1327, he dies. The official announcement says it was natural causes, a convenient end for a political embarrassment. But the whispers tell a different story, a story of a red-hot poker, a method of murder designed to leave no external mark, a cruel parody of the vice he was accused of. Yet, historians still argue whether this Gothic horror actually happened. The Fieschi letter, a document discovered centuries later in a papal archive, claims that Edward II actually escaped Berkeley, disguised as a servant, and lived out his days as a hermit in Italy, watching the world from a holy distance. It is a haunting possibility. The king who wanted a quiet life finally getting it, only after losing everything. But in England, the wheel turns. Isabella and Mortimer are now the regents for the teenage Edward III. They rule with the same arrogance they once condemned. Mortimer behaves like a king, piling up earldoms and parading his relationship with the Queen Mother. He has become the new dispenser, but they have miscalculated the boy. Edward III is not his father. He is 17 years old, sharp, and intensely aware of his dignity. He resents being a puppet. In October 1330, the young king acts. He and a small group of loyal friends sneak into Nottingham Castle at night, guided by the Castellan through a secret tunnel cut into the sandstone rock, a passage still known today as Mortimer's Hole. They burst into the Queen's chamber. Isabella screams, "Fair son, have pity on the gentle Mortimer." But the son has no pity. Mortimer is seized, dragged out, and later hanged at Tyburn. Isabella is spared, but she is forced into a comfortable retirement, stripped of her power, left to remember the days when she was the wolf who brought down a king. The brothers at war theme here is a variation, a war between husband and wife, between father and son, a civil war of the heart that bled into the state. The reign of Edward II proved that the crown is not just a hat, it is a job. When the person wearing it cannot do the work, the system breaks. The tragedy leaves a deep scar on the English psyche, a fear of weak kings and overmighty favorites. But as the sun rises on the reign of Edward III, the mood shifts. The young king shakes off the ghosts of his father's murder and his mother's betrayal. He looks across the channel, not with the eyes of a negotiator, but with the eyes of a predator. He claims the throne of France itself. The internal wars are over for a moment. The 100 Years' War is about to begin. The castle is quiet now. The screams of Berkeley faded into legend, and the realm sleeps under the watchful, ambitious gaze of a king who will make England feared again. The long golden afternoon of the Plantagenet summer is fading into a violet twilight, and we find ourselves in the court of Richard II, a place where the air is always perfumed and the violence is wrapped in silk. It is the late 1390s, and the roughness of the old warrior kings has been replaced by a shimmering, fragile beauty. Richard II is not like his grandfather, Edward III, the breaker of nations. Richard is an artist of kingship. He invents the handkerchief because he cannot bear to wipe his nose on his sleeve. He encourages the chefs to write cookbooks. He wears shoes with points so long they have to be chained to his knees to allow him to walk. He believes with a terrifying sincerity that he is not merely a ruler, but a conduit for the divine, a figure painted in gold leaf on the altarpiece of history. He sits on his throne like a statue, requiring his courtiers to fall to their knees if his gaze happens to sweep across them. But beneath the velvet and the pearls, there is a deep insecurity, a fear born in his boyhood when he faced down the screaming mob of the peasants' revolt. He learned then that the people are a hydra, and he has spent his adult life trying to build a wall of sanctity between himself and them. And standing just outside that wall, watching with cool, practical eyes, is his cousin, Henry Bolingbroke. Henry and Richard are the same age, born months apart, playmates in the nursery of the royal family. They are double first cousins, their bloodlines so intertwined they are nearly genetic mirrors. Yet their souls are opposites. Richard is the sun, burning with a distant, haughty light. Henry is the earth, solid, capable, a tournament champion who knows how to talk to a soldier and how to balance a ledger. They are the Cain and Abel of the late 14th century, though for a long time the rivalry is hidden under the polite rituals of the court. The tension finally breaks in 1398, not on a battlefield, but at a sporting event. Henry Bolingbroke accuses the Duke of Norfolk of treason. A duel is arranged. It is to be the trial by combat of the century, held at Coventry. The lists are built, the crowds gather. The knights are armored in plate steel that gleams like polished water. But just as the lances are lowered, Richard throws down his warden's staff. "Ho!" cries the herald. The king stops the fight. He cannot bear to see his cousin gain glory, nor can he risk the outcome. In a moment of capricious tyranny that stuns the crowd, he banishes both men. Norfolk is exiled for life, Henry Bolingbroke for 10 years. It is a sentence that solves nothing and angers everyone. Henry leaves, riding out of London amidst a crowd of weeping citizens who already love him more than they love their king. Richard breathes a sigh of relief. He is safe. He is absolute. And then he makes the mistake that brings the house of Plantagenet crashing down. In 1399, Henry's father, the colossal John of Gaunt, dies. By law, Henry should inherit the vast Lancastrian estates, a kingdom within a kingdom. But Richard, blinded by greed and the need to crush his rival, changes the rules. He extends Henry's exile to life and confiscates the entire inheritance. It is a theft so breathtaking that it shatters the unwritten contract of the feudal world. Every baron in England looks at his own estates and thinks, if the king can steal the Lancastrian heritage, my manor is just a snack. Richard, oblivious to the thunderclouds gathering, decides this is the perfect time to go on a military expedition to Ireland. He takes his army, his favourites, and the crown jewels across the Irish Sea, leaving England wide open. In July 1399, 3 ships appear off the coast of Yorkshire at a desolate, crumbling port called Ravenspur. Henry Bolingbroke has returned. He steps onto the shingle, not as an invader, he claims, but as a victim seeking justice. "I come only for my rights," he tells the nervous lords who ride out to meet him. "I come to claim my father's lands." It is a lie, but it is the kind of lie people are desperate to believe. The response is an avalanche. The great northern earls, the Percys, the Nevilles, flock to his banner. They are not rising against the king. They are rising for the rule of law. Henry's army grows with every mile he marches south. The keeper of the realm, Richard's uncle, the Duke of York, raises an army to stop him. Looks at the size of Henry's force, looks at the righteousness of his cause, and promptly switches sides. By the time Richard Thimcadit finally rushes back from Ireland, landing in Wales, he finds he has no kingdom left. His soldiers desert him in the night, melting away into the Welsh mist. The king is left with a handful of followers, wandering from castle to castle, a golden idol with no worshippers. The final confrontation takes place at Flint Castle. It is a scene of haunting pathos. Henry Bolingbroke waits in the courtyard, surrounded by thousands of steel-clad soldiers. Richard stands on the ramparts, looking down. He sees the reality of power. It is not in the anointing oil. It is in the men with spears. He descends. The meeting between the cousins is polite, terrifyingly quiet. Henry kneels. "My lord," he says, "I have come before my time. But your people complain that you have ruled them harshly for 22 years. With God's help, I shall help you to govern better." Richard, looking at the army that surrounds him, replies softly, "Fair cousin, since it pleases you, it pleases me well." Legend says that Richard's favorite greyhound, a dog that had never left his side, suddenly ran across the courtyard and fawned on Henry, abandoning its master. Richard watched it go, a final stinging symbol that the mandate of heaven had shifted. They ride to London, not as king and cousin, but as captor and captive. The crowds cheer Henry and throw dust at Richard. In the Tower of London, that stone echo chamber of English history, Richard is forced to abdicate. He reads a statement declaring himself insufficient and useless. It is a humiliation that strips him of his identity. On September 30th, 1399, Parliament meets. An empty throne stands in the hall, draped in cloth of gold. Henry Bolingbroke stands up, crosses himself, and claims the realm by right of conquest and descent. He sits on the throne. He is now King Henry IV. The Plantagenet line has snapped. The House of Lancaster has begun. But the transition is not clean. The hollow crown, as Shakespeare would later call it, has been exposed. The mystery is gone. If a king can be fired for incompetence, then a king is just a man with a better hat. Richard is spirited away to Pontefract Castle in Yorkshire, a grim fortress in the heart of Lancastrian territory. He is never seen in public again. Historians still argue about how he died. Did he starve himself in a fit of melancholic despair? Was he smothered with a pillow? Or was he simply left in a cold room without food and water, the door locked, the candle guttering out? The most likely truth is the cruelest: enforced starvation, a slow, quiet erasing of a life. By February 1400, the body of the beautiful, vain, misunderstood king is brought to London and displayed in St. Paul's Cathedral, his face left exposed so the people can see he is truly dead. But the eyes are closed, and the silence of the face hides the storm that his death has unleashed. Henry IV is king, but he sits on a stolen chair. He has killed his cousin, the anointed of God. He has taught the nobility that treason can succeed. And deep in the genetics of the royal family, the trauma of this usurpation begins to mutate. The cousins are dead. Long live the cousins. But the ghost of Richard II will haunt the Lancastrians for 3 generations. A silent reminder that what is taken by the sword must be held by the sword, and that the crown is a heavy thing, slippery with blood, and prone to falling. The crown that was stolen from Richard's head was made of gold and jewels, but for Henry IV, it might as well be made of lead and lined with thorns. We enter the first decade of the 15th century, a time of profound, grinding anxiety. Henry Bolingbroke, the man who rode into London as a savior, is now King Henry IV, a man aging at triple speed. He has discovered the terrible truth of usurpation. By proving that a king can be removed, he has destroyed the mystique that protects him. If Richard could fall, why not Henry? If the crown is a prize for the strongest, why should the Percys or the Mortimers or the Welsh stop fighting for it? Henry's reign is not a triumph. It is a 14-year panic attack. He sleeps in armor. He travels constantly to stomp out fires of rebellion. And he begins to suffer from a mysterious, disfiguring illness that rots his skin. A malady, the chroniclers whisper, is God's punishment for touching the Lord's anointed. The usurper's unease is not just political, it is physical. He is a man being eaten alive by his own ambition. The trouble begins predictably with the people who put him there. The Percy family, the Earl of Northumberland and his fiery son, Harry Hotspur, were the muscle behind Henry's coup. They are the warlords of the North, men who treat the Scottish border as their private hunting ground. They believe, with some justification, that they own Henry. They want money, they want land, they want the prisoners they captured in battle. Henry, broke and defensive, refuses. The relationship sours with the speed of milk left in the sun. Harry Hotspur is the romantic hero of the age, fearless, rash, obsessed with honor. The kind of man who would pluck bright honor from the pale-faced moon. He looks at the tired, sick king in London and sees a clerk, not a warrior. He decides that the kingmaker can also be the kingbreaker. In 1403, the Percys rise. They form a tripartite indenture, a secret treaty to slice England into 3 parts like a cake. The north for the Percys, Wales for the rebel prince Owain Glyndwr, and the south for the Mortimers. It is a plan to erase England as a unified state. The crisis comes to a head at the Battle of Shrewsbury in July 1403. This is a landmark moment in the history of brothers at war, though here it is, cousins and former friends. It is the first time that the terrifying weapon of English military supremacy, the longbow, is used by both sides against each other. The battle is a slaughterhouse. The sky over the pea fields of Shrewsbury darkens with arrows, a hissing storm that does not distinguish between rebel and royalist. Men fall in windrows, their armor punched through like paper. In the thick of the fighting is the king's eldest son, Prince Henry, known to history and Shakespeare as Prince Hal. He is 16 years old, a tall, severe boy who has none of the tavern-dwelling laziness of the plays. He is a warrior in training. During the charge, an arrow strikes the prince in the face. It slams into his cheek, just below the eye, and buries itself 6 inches deep in the bone of his skull, lodging at the base of the brain. By all medieval logic, the heir to the throne is a dead man walking. But the shaft is broken off, and the prince, incredibly, stays on his feet. He commands his men to fight on. Across the field, Harry Hotspur is doing what he does best, charging. He leads a wedge of knights directly at the royal standard, trying to kill the king personally. It is a suicide run, fueled by adrenaline and the belief that he is invincible. He hacks his way to within yards of the king, the royal banner wavering, the smell of the king's fear palpable. But then, chance intervenes. Hotspur raises his visor for a split second to get air. A fatal error. A stray arrow, perhaps fired by a dying archer, strikes him in the mouth and pierces his brain. He drops instantly. The rebel charge falters. The cry goes up. Hotspur is dead. The heart goes out of the rebellion. The battle ends not with a treaty, but with a pile of bodies. King Henry IV has survived, but the cost is gruesome. He takes Hotspur's body, salts it like a side of beef, and displays it between 2 millstones in the market square, then quarters it to be sent to the 4 corners of the kingdom. It is a grim message. Even the brightest star will be butchered if it falls. But the real drama, moves from the battlefield to the surgeon's table. Prince Hal is alive, but he has a rusted arrowhead embedded in the center of his head. The royal surgeons are terrified. To pull it out is to kill him. Enter John Bradmore, a genius of a medical man, a locksmith and surgeon who treats the human body like a complex mechanism. He invents a tool specifically for this wound, the Bradmore screw. It is a slender, threaded device that can be inserted into the wound, expanded inside the socket of the arrowhead, and then slowly, agonizingly, cranked out. For days he prepares the prince's wound with honey, a natural antiseptic, and probes of elder pith. Then, with the prince tied down and likely biting on leather to keep from screaming, Bradmore inserts the screw. He turns it, he pulls. The metal grinds against bone. And then, with a wet sound, the arrowhead comes free. The prince survives, but the scar on his face will remain forever. A constant reminder that the crown is won by surviving pain that would kill lesser men. The rest of Henry IV's reign is a long, slow fade. The victory at Shrewsbury does not bring peace. It only buys time. The king's illness worsens. He suffers from seizures, fainting spells, and skin eruptions. He becomes a recluse, haunting the corridors of his palaces, terrified of the next plot. He talks constantly of going on a crusade to Jerusalem, believing that if he can just die in the Holy Land, God will forgive him for the murder of Richard II. He saves money, he plans the route, he buys the maps. But his body refuses to cooperate. He is a man trying to outrun a curse on rotting legs. Meanwhile, the relationship between the sick king and the scarred prince deteriorates. Prince Hal, now a proven commander and the effective ruler of the council, grows impatient. He sees his father's indecision, his paranoia, his hoarding of money, and he chafes. The court splits into two factions, the old, sick king's men and the young, dynamic prince's men. There is a famous story, perhaps apocryphal, but emotionally true, that the prince once came into his father's bedroom while the king was sleeping. Seeing the crown on the pillow and thinking his father dead, Hal picked it up and tried it on. The king woke up, saw his son wearing the symbol of his power, and accused him of wishing him dead. "I never thought to hear you speak again," the prince says. The king replies, with the bitterness of a man who knows he is being replaced, "Thy wish was father, Harry." To that thought. The end comes in 1413. Henry IV is praying in Westminster Abbey when he collapses. His attendants carry him, not to a hospital, but to the nearest room, the abbot's parlor. When the king wakes, he asks where he is. They tell him the room is called the Jerusalem Chamber. The king smiles a dry, ironic smile. The prophecy is fulfilled. He will die in Jerusalem after all, just not the one he imagined. He gives his final advice to his son, warning him that the crown is a trouble, a burden, a sin. But Hal, Prince Henry, is not listening to the warnings. He is looking at the future. Henry IV dies, the first king of England since the conquest to die in his bed without being murdered or deposed. Yet his life felt like a punishment. The usurper's unease is over. The silence of the death chamber is broken by the sound of boots on stone. Prince Hal steps out. He is 26 years old, scarred, hardened, and utterly focused. He is Henry IV. He does not share his father's guilt. He believes with a burning, fanatical certainty that God is on his side. He will not waste his time fighting English rebels. He will solve the problem of brothers at war by giving the brothers a new enemy. He turns his eyes to France. The civil wars are suspended. The united war is about to begin. The atmosphere shifts from the claustrophobic sick room to the cold, fresh air of the English Channel. The ships are gathering. The game has changed. The sword of the warrior king is returned to its scabbard, and the Iron Age of Henry V ends not with a bang, but with a silence that stretches for 40 years. We stand now in the mid-15th century, a time when the clear, bright lines of English history blur into a fog of confusion and tragedy. Henry I, the hero of Agincourt, the man who conquered France and married its princess, died young, struck down by dysentery in the heat of a foreign campaign. He left behind a legacy of glory, a bankrupt treasury, and an heir who was 9 months old. Henry VI is the King of England and the King of France, but he is a baby sitting on 2 thrones that are drifting apart like ice floes. As the boy grows, it becomes painfully clear that the apple has fallen, not just far from the tree, but in a different orchard entirely. Henry VI is a man of profound, heartbreaking piety. He is a scholar, a builder of colleges like Eton and King's College, Cambridge, a man who wears hair shirts and spends his nights in prayer. He hates war. He hates discord. In a world of wolves, he is a lamb who believes that if he is gentle enough, the wolves will become vegetarians. It is a beautiful philosophy for a monk, but a suicide note for a medieval king. The tragedy of his reign is slow-moving. It is the tragedy of a vacuum. Because the king cannot rule, first because of his youth, and then because of his nature, power becomes a free-for-all. The great magnates, men with private armies and royal blood, step into the empty space. On one side, we have the court party, led by the Duke of Somerset and the king's formidable French wife, Margaret of Anjou. Margaret is only a teenager when she arrives, but she possesses the spine that her husband lacks. She realizes quickly that to protect her husband and her son, she must be the king in all but name. She is beautiful, fierce, and utterly partisan. She does not soothe the factions. She picks a side. On the other side stands Richard, Duke of York. Richard is the wealthiest man in England, a direct descendant of Edward III, and a man who believes, with growing resentment, that the kingdom is being driven off a cliff by incompetent favorites. He is the strong man the people crave, a proven soldier, a competent administrator, a man who looks like a king. The tension snaps in the terrible year of 1453. It is a year of disasters. In France, the English army is crushed at the Battle of Castillon. The 100 Years' War effectively ends. England has lost everything: Normandy, Anjou, Aquitaine. 300 years of empire are wiped out. The news hits London like a physical blow. When the messenger brings the tidings to Henry VI at the hunting lodge of Clarendon, the king listens, and then he simply disappears. He does not die. He does not faint. He withdraws. He falls into a catatonic stupor that defies medical explanation. Historians and psychiatrists still debate the nature of this madness. Was it catatonic schizophrenia? A major depressive breakdown? A genetic curse passed down from his grandfather, the mad King Charles VI of France? The king sits for hours, unmoving, unspeaking. He has to be fed with a spoon. He has to be moved from his chair to his bed, like a doll. When his wife Margaret brings their newborn son, Prince Edward, to him, hoping the sight of his heir will spark a recognition, the king looks at the baby with the blank, empty eyes of a statue. He does not know his own child. With the king's mind absent, the government collapses. The lords have no referee. The Duke of York steps forward. He is named Protector of the Realm. For a brief, shining moment, it seems that order might be restored. York clears out the corrupt advisors. He imprisons his rival Somerset in the Tower. He governs with a firm, sensible hand. He tastes the power that he feels is his birthright. But the tragedy of the situation is that the king is not dead. In late 1454, on Christmas Day, Henry VI wakes up. It is as sudden as his collapse. He asks where he is. He expresses surprise that he has a son. He is gentle, confused, and completely unaware that the world has changed. He immediately reverses everything. He releases Somerset. He fires York. He restores the court party to power. The Duke of York, having saved the kingdom, is now treated as a traitor. He flees to his estates in the north, and he takes his private army with him. The slide into civil war is now inevitable. It begins not with a declaration, but with a street fight. In May 1455, the Duke of York and his allies, the powerful Neville family, led by the Earl of Warwick, march south. They claim they only want to protect the king from his evil counselors. It is the oldest lie in the book. The royalist army meets them in the narrow streets of the town of St. Albans. This is the first Battle of St. Albans, the official start of the Wars of the Roses. It is a small, messy affair, lasting less than an hour. The town is barricaded. The royalists hold the market square. The Yorkists cannot break through. Then the young Earl of Warwick, soon to be known as the Kingmaker, does something reckless and brilliant. He leads his men through the back gardens and alleyways, smashing through fences and hedges, bursting into the market square from the side. The surprise is total. The royalist line crumbles. The violence crosses a sacred line. The Duke of Somerset, the king's favorite, is cornered outside the castle inn and hacked to death. But the true horror is what happens to the king. Henry VI is standing under the royal banner, bewildered by the noise and the blood. He is not fighting. He is just standing there. An arrow strikes him in the neck. It is a graze, not mortal, but the symbolism is shattering. The king's person is no longer inviolate. He is wounded by his own subjects. The Yorkists capture him. They treat him with elaborate, terrifying politeness. They kneel before him. They ask for his blessing, but they lead him back to London as a prisoner. The Duke of York is protector again. The Mad King is a puppet in a game he does not understand. This is the moment where the myth of the Wars of the Roses begins to take root in our imagination, though the reality is far more complex. We imagine a neat division, the Red Rose of Lancaster versus the White Rose of York. In truth, the Red Rose was barely used at this stage. It was a later invention of Henry VII to create a symmetrical symbol. But the White Rose of York was real, a badge worn by men who believed that the government was broken and that only a strong hand could fix it. The tragedy is that both sides are right and both sides are wrong. Margaret is right that York is a usurper in waiting. York is right that Henry is unfit to rule. There is no legal solution to a king who is a saintly simpleton. The years that follow are a phony war, a time of uneasy truces and armed standoffs. The king drifts in and out of sanity, a ghost haunting his own palace. He spends his days reading scripture and handing out alms, while in the corridors, men wear mail under their velvet doublets. The Queen, Margaret of Anjou, moves her court to the Midlands, to Coventry, turning it into a Lancastrian fortress. She stops pretending to seek peace. She introduces a draft. She buys weapons. She rallies the sons of the men killed at St. Albans. She is fighting for her son's inheritance, and her love is as dangerous as York's ambition. The atmosphere is thick with the static electricity of a coming storm. The brothers at war are now cousins, the House of York against the House of Lancaster. But the intimacy remains. These men know each other's signatures, their hunting grounds, their children's names. They have sat in Parliament together for 20 years. Now, they are calculating the distance an arrow can travel. We end this section in the lull before the true carnage. The year is 1459. The Loveday procession has just happened, a bizarre staged ritual in London where the king forced the Yorkist and Lancastrian lords to walk hand in hand to St. Paul's Cathedral, singing hymns. The Queen held hands with the Duke of York. It was a piece of beautiful, meaningless theatre. Everyone smiled, everyone sang, and everyone went home to sharpen their swords. The madness of the king has become the madness of the realm. The center cannot hold. The king is a vacuum, and the wind is rushing in, howling through the cracks in the state, carrying with it the scent of snow and blood. The roses are blooming, but they are about to be trampled into the mud. The snow begins to fall, drifting down from a sky the color of bruised iron, covering the muddy tracks of armies that have torn the heart out of England. It is the winter of 1460-1461, the season where the Wars of the Roses stops being a political dispute and becomes a blood feud. The phony war is over. The civility of the Loveday procession is a distant, bitter memory. We are now in the era of the vendetta. The stakes were raised at the Battle of Wakefield in December, a disaster for the House of York. The Duke of York, the man who would be king, was lured out of Sandal Castle and slaughtered. His enemies mocked him even in death, cutting off his head and mounting it on the gates of York, adorning it with a paper crown to laugh at his ambition. His son, the 17-year-old Earl of Rutland, was captured on the bridge and begged for his life. Lord Clifford, a Lancastrian, whose own father had been killed at St. Albans, looked at the terrifyingly young boy and said, "By God's blood, thy father slew mine, and so will I do thee and all thy kin." He drove a dagger into the boy's heart. It was a moment that stripped the war of its chivalry. There are no more prisoners now. There is only the harvest of the reaper. But the Lancastrians have made a fatal miscalculation. They cut off the head of the Hydra, but they forgot the body. Richard of York is dead, but he has left behind a son who is a force of nature. Edward of March, now the Duke of York and claimant to the throne, is 18 years old. He is a giant of a man, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, in an age where the average height is 5'7". He is handsome, charismatic, and possessed of a terrifying cold fury. He does not weep for his father. He mobilizes. At the Battle of Mortimer's Cross in February 1461, a strange meteorological phenomenon occurs, a parhelion, or sundog, where 3 suns appear in the sky. His soldiers are terrified, thinking it an omen of doom. Edward, with the quick wit of a born leader, tells them it represents the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, come to bless their cause. They believe him. They crush the Lancastrians. Edward marches to London, where the citizens, terrified of Margaret of Anjou's northern horde that has been looting its way south, throw open the gates. In a hasty, rapturous ceremony, Edward is proclaimed King Edward IV. But a proclamation is not a coronation. To wear the crown, he must destroy the other king. The two armies converge in Yorkshire, on a plateau between the villages of Towton and Saxton. It is Palm Sunday, March 29th, 1461. The holiest week of the Christian calendar is about to witness the unholiest slaughter in English history. The scale is staggering. Modern historians and archaeologists still debate the numbers. Chroniclers claimed 50,000 to 100,000 men were present, while modern estimates suggest perhaps 50,000 total, which is still a colossal percentage of the male population of England at the time. It is effectively a collision of the entire fighting strength of the nation. Everyone is there. If you are a noble in 1461, you are at Towton, or you are hiding. As the soldiers form their lines, the weather turns apocalyptic. A blizzard sweeps in from the south, a driving, blinding wall of white that howls across the open fields. The wind is the deciding factor. It blows directly into the faces of the Lancastrian army, blinding them with snow and sleet. The Yorkist commander, Lord Fauconberg, a grizzled veteran of the French wars, sees the advantage. He orders his archers to step forward, loose a volley into the wind, and then immediately step back. The wind carries the Yorkist arrows further than usual. They fall like deadly hail into the Lancastrian ranks. The Lancastrian archers, blinded by the snow, fire back, but the wind arrests their arrows. Their shafts fall short, sticking uselessly into the ground 50 yards in front of the Yorkist lines. Fauconberg waits, then orders his men to advance, pull the enemy's own arrows out of the turf, and shoot them back. It is a grim practical joke of war. The Lancastrians are being killed by their own supply train. Forced to abandon the arrow duel, the Lancastrians charge. The two massive lines, thousands of men deep, crash together with a sound that must have been audible for miles. The grinding of plate armor, the shattering of ashwood poleaxes, the screaming of men. The battle becomes a push of pike, a crushing rugby scrum of steel. It lasts for 10 hours. Medieval battles usually end in an hour or two. Towton goes on all day. The snow keeps falling, coating the dead in white shrouds as soon as they drop. The men fight in a twilight gloom, slipping on frozen mud that is rapidly turning into a slush of red. It is said that fresh troops had to climb over the piles of corpses to get to the front line to die. In the center of the crush, the Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker, fights on foot. Having killed his own horse earlier to show his men he would not flee, King Edward IV moves through the lines like a god of war, his height making him a beacon, his voice rallying the exhausted men. Somewhere behind the lines, Henry VI is sitting under a tree, or perhaps in a tent, praying. He is the cause of all this, yet he is entirely removed from it. He prays for peace, while his subjects disembowel each other in the snow. It is the ultimate tragic irony of his reign. A man who wouldn't hurt a fly is the reason 28,000 men will not see tomorrow. And that number, 28,000 dead, is the figure cited by the heralds after the battle. While some modern scholars argue this was an exaggeration for propaganda, the discovery of mass graves at Towton Hall in 1996 suggests the horror was all too real. The skeletons found there show injuries of barbaric intensity, skulls smashed by multiple poleaxe blows, faces sliced open, evidence of men fighting in a frenzy of adrenaline and hate. The break comes in the late afternoon. The Duke of Norfolk arrives with fresh Yorkist reinforcements, slamming into the Lancastrian flank. The line buckles. The retreat turns into a rout, and the rout turns into a massacre. The Lancastrians flee towards the Cockbeck. a small stream swollen by the winter snow. The bridge has been destroyed. Trapped between the pursuing Yorkists and the freezing water, the soldiers panic. They try to swim in armor and drown. Others try to scramble over. The chroniclers tell us of a bridge of bodies, that the pile of corpses in the stream became so high that the pursuing Yorkists could walk dry-shod across the backs of the dead to kill the men on the other side. The water runs red with blood for miles downstream. Local legend says the river still runs red on the anniversary of the battle, though that is likely just the peat washing down from the moors. The Lancastrian leadership is decimated. The butcher, Lord Clifford, is already dead, struck by an arrow in the throat the day before. The Earl of Northumberland is dead in the snow. Henry VI, Queen Margaret, and their son flee north into Scotland, exiles in their own kingdom. Edward IV stands victorious on the field, his armor black with blood, his breath steaming in the freezing air. He is the master of England. The carnage of Towton has washed away the old generation. The slate has been wiped clean with a terrible thoroughness. Edward marches into York. He looks up at the city gates, sees the rotting head of his father and the head of his brother. He orders them taken down. In their place, he puts the heads of the Lancastrian lords he has just killed. It is a grim symmetry. The debt of Wakefield is paid. The sun sets on the bloodiest day in the history of English soil. The wind dies down, leaving a landscape that is eerily silent, save for the groans of the dying and the cawing of crows gathering in the bare trees. The Wars of the Roses seems to be over. The House of Lancaster is crushed, its king a fugitive, its lords dead. The House of York is triumphant, led by a young golden warrior who looks like a legend come to life. But as the gravediggers begin their work, hacking at the frozen ground to bury the sons, fathers, and brothers who died for a choice between two cousins, a cold truth remains buried in the snow. Violence breeds violence. Edward has won the crown by the sword, and he has taught the survivors a dangerous lesson. That power belongs to the man who strikes hardest. The sun in splendor has risen, but the shadows it casts are long and dark, and in the courts of Europe, the Earl of Warwick is already watching his young protege with a gaze that is less like a father and more like an owner. The king is made, but the kingmaker is just getting started. The snow of Towton has melted, and the blood has been washed into the earth, feeding the roots of the white roses that now bloom in every hedgerow. It is the mid-1460s, and King Edward IV sits on the throne of England, a golden giant of a man, 22 years old, invincible in battle, and dangerously bored by peace. He has done the impossible. He has secured the crown, crushed the Lancastrians, and brought a kind of hedonistic glamour back to the court. But behind the throne stands the architect of this victory, Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, the kingmaker. Warwick is the richest man in England, a statesman of immense gravity who views Edward not just as a king, but as his creation. Warwick has a plan. To cement the dynasty, he is negotiating a prestigious marriage for Edward with a French princess. It is the sensible, geopolitical move. He spends months in diplomatic talks, putting his own reputation on the line, assuring the King of France that the English boy king will do as he is told. But Edward IV has a fatal flaw. He does not like to be told what to do, especially when it comes to his bed. In 1464, Warwick proudly presents the French marriage treaty to the royal council. Edward leans back in his chair, smiles his lazy, charming smile, and drops a bombshell that shatters the room. He cannot marry the French princess, he says, because he is already married. He has secretly wed Elizabeth Woodville, a widow of a Lancastrian knight, a woman with no royal blood, no dowry, and a massive family of ambitious brothers and sisters. The silence in the council chamber is absolute. For Warwick, this is not just a political blunder. It is a public humiliation. He has been made to look like a fool before the courts of Europe. The king has chosen a commoner over the kingmaker's advice. The rift widens into a chasm. The Woodvilles swarm the court like locusts. They are beautiful, grasping, and incredibly successful. They marry into the greatest families, taking the husbands and heiresses that Warwick had earmarked for his own daughters. The kingmaker finds himself standing on the outside of the circle he built. He seethes, and in his anger, he looks around for a weapon to punish the ungrateful boy he crowned. He finds one in the king's own family. George, Duke of Clarence, is Edward's younger brother. He is everything Edward is not: petulant, jealous, easily manipulated, and possessed of a whining sense of entitlement. George feels overshadowed by his magnificent brother and threatened by the Woodvilles. Warwick whispers in his ear. He offers George his eldest daughter, Isabel, and with her, a fortune. He hints that perhaps Edward is illegitimate, that perhaps George is the true heir. The brothers at war dynamic returns, but this time it is a cold, creeping poison. George listens. He drinks the wine of treason. In 1469, the kingmaker and the king's brother strike. They sail to Calais, marry George to Isabel in defiance of the king's order, and issue a manifesto declaring they will reform the government. It is a coup. They defeat Edward's loyalists at the Battle of Edgecote Moor. They capture the king himself. For a few bizarre months, England has two kings: Edward, locked in Warwick's castle, and Henry VI, still locked in the Tower. But Warwick discovers a hard truth. You can capture a king, but you cannot rule without him. The country slides into chaos. The nobles refuse to obey Warwick's orders. Reluctantly, he releases Edward. There is a tense, fake reconciliation. The brothers embrace, but the eyes of the king are cold. He knows George is a traitor. He knows Warwick is an enemy. The final break comes in 1470. Edward moves to arrest them. Warwick and Clarence flee to France, refugees in a game that has spun out of control. There, in the court of Louis XI, the Spider King, the most impossible alliance in history, is forged. Louis XV brings together Warwick, the kingmaker, and his mortal enemy, Margaret of Anjou, the exiled Lancastrian queen. These two have spent 15 years killing each other's friends and family. Warwick drove Margaret from England. Margaret executed Warwick's father. Now, forced by hatred of Edward IV, they must join hands. The scene of their meeting is excruciating. Warwick has to kneel before the woman he called a whore and beg for forgiveness. He has to promise to restore her husband, Henry VI, to the throne. It is the ultimate betrayal of his principles, a desperate gamble to remain relevant. They invade England in late 1470. Edward IV, caught off guard and betrayed by the northern lords, has to flee. He escapes with a handful of followers, wading into the sea at Calm Lynn to catch a coal ship to Burgundy, leaving his kingdom and his heavily pregnant wife behind. The kingmaker enters London. He goes to the Tower and brings Henry VI out into the light. The scene is pathetic rather than triumphant. Henry is dirty, confused, and dressed in rags. He does not understand what is happening. They dress him in velvet, put a crown on his head, and parade him through the streets. He is a prop, a shadow king blinking in the sun. This period is known as the Readaption, but it is built on sand. The alliance between Warwick, Clarence, and Margaret is held together by spite and hatred. George of Clarence is miserable. By restoring Henry VI, he has just disinherited himself. Edward IV does not stay down. He is a Plantagenet. He bounces. In March 1471, he lands at Ravenspur, the same spot where Henry Bolingbroke landed 70 years earlier. He has a tiny force borrowed from the Duke of Burgundy. He marches south, claiming, just as Bolingbroke did, that he only wants his duchy. But as he moves, the snowball grows. And then, the perjured Clarence makes his move. George realizes that if Warwick wins, the Lancastrians will eventually kill him. If Edward wins, his brother might forgive him. On the road to confrontation, George switches sides again. He rides out with his army, not to fight Edward, but to join him. The brothers embrace in a field, the false, fleeting, perjured Clarence weeping on Edward's shoulder. Edward forgives him, or acts like he does. He needs the swords. The climax comes on Easter Sunday, 1471, at the Battle of Barnet. It is fought in a thick, supernatural fog, a mist so dense that men cannot see 5 yards in front of them. The chroniclers say it was conjured by a friar wizard, but it is likely just the damp English spring. The battle is a chaotic, blind brawl. In the confusion, the Earl of Oxford's Lancastrian troops, returning from a successful charge, are mistaken for Edward's men by their own allies. Warwick's badge is a star with rays. Oxford's is a star with streamers. In the fog, they look the same. The Lancastrians fire on their own friends. The cry of treason goes up. The line breaks. Warwick the Kingmaker realizes the game is lost. His horse is gone. He tries to retreat on foot towards the woods, encumbered by his heavy armor. But Edward's men catch him. There is no mercy this time. The man who made and unmade kings is surrounded, knocked to the ground, and stabbed to death. His body is stripped and later displayed on the pavement of St. Paul's Cathedral, naked so that all can see the great Earl is truly mortal. Edward IV is master of London once more. But the war is not quite over. Queen Margaret and her son, Prince Edward, have just landed in the west. Edward marches to meet them at Tewkesbury. This is the final act of the Lancastrian tragedy. The battle is decisive. The Lancastrian prince, Edward, the Red Rose heir, is killed, either in the fighting or, as legend has it, executed after being slapped across the face by the king's gauntlet. Margaret of Anjou is captured, a broken woman who has lost her husband, her son, and her crown. And back in London, on the very night Edward returns in triumph, Henry VI dies in the Tower. Of pure displeasure and melancholy, the official report says, but forensic examination of his skull, centuries later, will reveal a small, neat hole consistent with a heavy blow from a hammer or a pick. The House of Lancaster is extinct. The section closes with Edward IV sitting securely on his throne, the son of York, blazing hot. He has killed the old king, the rebel prince, and the kingmaker. He has his brothers back at his side, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, loyal and able, and George, Duke of Clarence, smiling his weak, treacherous smile. But the reunion is a facade. Edward knows what George is. He knows that treason is a habit. The civil war of the armies has ended, but the civil war of the family has merely moved indoors. The wine is poured, The music plays, but the king watches his brother George across the rim of his goblet, and he wonders how long the peace can last when the man next to you has already sold you out twice. The festivities of Edward IV's second reign are bright, loud, and desperate, like a party held on the edge of a cliff. It is the late 1470s, and the House of York seems unassailable. The Lancastrians are dead. The king is at the height of his power, growing fatter and more jovial with every feast, surrounded by mistresses and the ever-present Woodvilles. But inside the royal family, the brothers-at-war dynamic is festering. George, Duke of Clarence, has not learned his lesson. He is a man who cannot stop picking at a scab. He is a widower now, his wife Isabel Neville having died, possibly of poison. Or so George screams to anyone who will listen. He begins to act erratically, refusing to eat at the king's table for fear of poison, spreading rumors that the king is illegitimate and plotting to marry the heiress of Burgundy against Edward's wishes. He is a walking liability, a loose cannon rolling around the deck of the ship of state. In 1477, the patience of the king snaps. George arrests a servant, accuses her of poisoning his wife, and has her judicially murdered in a kangaroo court. It is a direct challenge to the king's justice. Edward IV acts with the coldness of a man who has run out of brotherly love. He arrests George and throws him into the Tower. The trial is a family tragedy played out in Parliament. The prosecutor is the king himself. No one else dares to speak against the Duke. Edward stands before the Lords, recounting George's treasons, his betrayals, his unnatural loathing. George denies it all, but the verdict is a foregone conclusion. He is condemned to death. But how do you kill a prince of the blood without sparking a riot? The execution is carried out in private, in the dark silence of the Tower. The legend, and it is likely true, says that George was drowned in a butt of Malmsey wine. It is a grimly appropriate end for a man who spent his life drunk on his own ambition. He loved the sweet, heavy wine of the Mediterranean. In the end, it swallowed him whole. Edward IV never truly recovers from this. He has killed his own brother. He grows heavier, his face more flushed, his life a blur of excess. In April 1483, at the age of only 40, the magnificent son of York sets suddenly. He dies, likely of a stroke or pneumonia, brought on by a fishing trip on the Thames. He leaves behind a 12-year-old heir, Edward Phipps, and a 9-year-old spare, Richard, Duke of York. He also leaves a will appointing his only surviving brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, as Lord Protector. Richard of Gloucester is 30 years old. He is a small, slight man with one shoulder higher than the other. Scoliosis, not a hunchback, but enough to make him physically distinct in a family of giants. He has been the loyal brother, the governor of the North, the man who stayed true when George turned traitor. He is a soldier, a pious administrator, and a man who despises the Woodville family. When he hears of Edward's death, he moves with the speed of a striking cobra. He intercepts the young king's entourage at Stony Stratford, arrests the queen's brother and son, the king's uncle and half-brother, and takes custody of the boy. He tells Edward Thief, "They were conspiring against your safety." The boy weeps and says, "I know of no conspiracy." But he is 12. He gets in the carriage. Richard brings the king to London and lodges him in the Tower, which is technically a royal palace, not just a prison. He delays the coronation. He starts to uncover plots. He claims the Woodvilles are trying to kill him. And then, the story takes a turn into the dark. On a Sunday in June, a preacher at St. Paul's Cross delivers a sermon claiming that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville was invalid because he was pre-contracted to another woman. Therefore, the sermon argues, the princes are bastards. Therefore, Richard is the rightful king. It is a legalistic coup. The citizens of London listen in stunned silence. A few days later, a group of nobles petitions Richard to take the crown. He accepts with a show of reluctance. He becomes Richard III. The two boys, Edward V and his brother Richard, remain in the Tower. They are seen playing in the garden, shooting arrows and running on the grass. Then they are seen only behind the barred windows. Then, by the late summer of 1483, they are seen no more. The disappearance of the princes in the Tower is the great black hole of English history. Did Richard order their deaths? It is the most likely answer. He was a man of ruthless pragmatism. As long as they lived, they were a rallying point for rebellion. Did the Duke of Buckingham, his right-hand man, do it to curry favour? Did Henry Tudor's mother, Margaret Beaufort, orchestrate it to clear the path for her son? We will likely never know, but the silence of the boys screams louder than any scream. Their disappearance turns the stomach of the nation. The English people had tolerated usurpers, but child murder is a different sin. It changes the atmosphere. The son of York has gone behind a cloud, and the air grows cold. Richard III rules for 2 years. He is a good administrator, passing laws to protect the poor and reform the legal system. He works frantically to be a good king, as if he can wash away the blood of his nephews with acts of parliament. But he is a haunted man. His own son dies. His wife, Anne Neville, dies. The chroniclers say he slept badly, waking in the night and reaching for his dagger, pursued by terrible dreams. He is a king alone, surrounded by men who are calculating his odds of survival. And across the sea, in Brittany, the last hope of the Lancastrians is gathering his strength. Henry Tudor is a nobody, a man with a thin, dubious claim to the throne through his mother's Beaufort line, an illegitimate branch of the Plantagenets. He has spent his entire adult life in exile, watching, waiting, and surviving. He is not a warrior. He is an accountant of power. He gathers the exiles, the Woodville loyalists, the men who hate Richard. He borrows money from the French king. He hires mercenaries. In August 1485, he sets sail. The brothers at war are all dead. Edward is dead. George is dead. The princes are dead. Only Richard is left, the last brother standing in a graveyard of his own making. He waits at Nottingham, the spider in the center of the web, waiting for the fly. But the fly is bringing an army, and the web is breaking. The Stanley family, powerful lords in the northwest, are hedging their bets. Richard holds Lord Stanley's son hostage to ensure loyalty, but Stanley's reply to the threat is chilling. "Sire, I have other sons." The loyalty of the realm has dissolved. The stage is set for the final collision. The Wars of the Roses, which began with a quarrel between cousins, will end with a battle between a king who lost his soul and an exile who has nothing to lose. The night of August 21st, 1485, is thick with the smell of damp earth and wood smoke. We are on a ridge near Market Bosworth in Leicestershire, in the centre of England. Below, in the valley of Redamore, the marsh grass whispers in the wind. King Richard III is in his tent, trying to sleep, but sleep is a battlefield he cannot conquer. The chroniclers tell us He is beset by terrible images, demons of the mind that pull at his sheets. Perhaps he sees the faces of his brother George, drowned in wine. Perhaps he sees the faces of his nephews, the boys who vanished into the dark of the tower. He rises before dawn, pale and hag-ridden, drinking wine to steady his hand. He is 32 years old, a seasoned warrior who has spent his life in the shadow of swords. He knows, with the instinct of a veteran, that today is the end. Across the valley, Henry Tudor is awake too. He is 28, a man who has never fought a battle in his life. He is relying on mercenaries, French pikemen, and the hope that the prophecies of the Welsh bards are true, that a Mab Darrigan, a son of prophecy, will return to free the land. But mostly, he is relying on the men standing on the sidelines. The Stanley brothers, Thomas and William, who have brought a massive private army to the field, but have refused to say which side they are on. They loom on the hill like vultures, waiting to see who bleeds first. The dawn breaks grey and miserable. The armies form up. Richard's force is larger, perhaps 10,000 men to Henry's 5,000. The king rides a white courser, wearing his full plate armor and a golden circlet around his helmet, a symbol that he is the anointed king, risking everything. He positions his army on Ambion Hill, looking down on Henry's motley collection of exiles and Frenchmen struggling through the marsh at the bottom. The battle begins with the roar of cannons, early primitive guns that spit stone balls and smoke, obscuring the field. Then comes the arrow storm, the familiar hiss of the longbow. The lines clash. It is the old, brutal music of England, the sound of steel on steel that has rung out since Hastings. But something is wrong. Richard's left wing, commanded by the Earl of Northumberland, does not move. The men stand still, their arms crossed, watching. It is a betrayal of silence. Northumberland has decided to sit this one out. Richard sees it. He looks at the Stanleys on the hill. They are not moving either. He realizes he is fighting alone. In this moment of supreme isolation, Richard III makes a decision that defines his legend. He spots Henry Tudor's standard in the distance, behind the main line. He sees the red dragon of Cadwallader waving in the wind. Richard decides to end the war the way a Plantagenet should, personally. He lowers his lance. He signals his household knights, his chosen men. And he charges. It is not a tactical maneuver. It is a suicide run, a thunderbolt aimed at the heart of the enemy. The king and his knights gallop down the hill, smashing into Henry's bodyguard with the force of a falling building. The chroniclers gasp at the violence of it. Richard is a man possessed. He kills Henry's standard-bearer, Sir William Brandon, driving his lance through the man's chest and snapping the shaft. He unhorses Sir John Cheney, a giant of a man, overthrowing him with sheer ferocity. He is within a sword's length of Henry Tudor. Henry, to his credit, stands his ground, though he is terrified. The swords are clashing. The king is cutting a path to the pretender. The crown is feet away from being secured. But then, the trap snaps shut. William Stanley, watching from the hill, sees the king exposed. He orders his 3,000 men to charge, not for Richard, but against him. The redcoats of the Stanley cavalry flood the field. They slam into Richard's small group of knights from the flank. The king is surrounded. His horse is killed under him. He fights on foot in the mud, shouting, "Treason, treason, treason," swinging his battle axe until his arm is numb. But there are too many of them. He is hacked down. The fatal blow is struck. a halberd to the back of the head that drives the helmet into the skull. The last Plantagenet king falls into the mire of the marsh. The silence that follows is the silence of a stopped clock. The Middle Ages have ended. Henry Tudor is stunned. He is alive. He is king. The crown, the gold circlet Richard wore, is found under a hawthorn bush, or perhaps in a sack of loot. The myth says, the bush. And it is a better story. Lord Stanley, the man who waited until the last minute, picks it up and places it on Henry's head. The army cheers, King Henry, King Henry. But the treatment of Richard's body tells us that the hate has not evaporated. The dead king is stripped naked, slung over the back of a horse like a hog, his long hair trailing in the dust. He is taken to Leicester and put on public display, humiliated in death, as he was feared in life. The Battle of Bosworth is the final act of the brothers at war. The Yorkist brothers are all gone, Edward by excess, George by the butt of wine, Richard by the sword. The Lancastrian brothers are gone. The field is left to a man who is neither fully York nor fully Lancaster, but something new. Henry Tudor, now King Henry VII, stands amidst the carnage, looking at a country that has forgotten how to be at peace. He knows that winning the battle is the easy part. Surviving the peace will be the work of a lifetime. He is a cold man, a calculator, a man who trusts no one. He has seen what happened to Richard. He has seen what happened to Henry VI. He resolves, there in the mud, that he will not be loved. He will be obeyed. The sensory shift is profound. From the clashing, vibrant, personal violence of the Plantagenets to the quiet, ink-stained, bureaucratic control of the Tudors. The sword is put away. The ledger is opened. The sword has done its work. Now comes the time for the needle and thread. Henry VII enters London, not as a sun god or a warrior hero, but as a tired, cautious man with a very long memory. He knows that the crown he picked up from under a hawthorn bush is slippery. He has no intention of being just another usurper in a century of usurpers. He needs to bind the wounds of the realm, not out of kindness, but out of necessity. The solution lies in a promise he made back in the cathedral at Rennes, while still in exile. If he won the throne, he would marry Elizabeth of York. She is the eldest daughter of Edward the Forbed, the sister of the missing princes in the Tower. She carries in her veins the undeniable legitimacy of the White Rose. By marrying her, Henry can stop the war. He can merge the two houses. It is the ultimate dynastic merger, a political marriage that is designed to end the argument of genetics forever. The wedding takes place in January 1486. It is a moment of supreme medieval pageantry, but beneath the velvet and the cloth of gold, there is a distinct lack of warmth. Henry waits until after he is crowned to marry her, ensuring that everyone knows he rules by his own right, not by hers. He is a man who leaves nothing to chance. But the symbolism is undeniable. To mark the union, the king's propagandists invent a new badge, perhaps the most famous logo in history, the Tudor Rose. They take the white rose of York and superimpose the red rose of Lancaster on top of it, or sometimes quarter them. It is a botanical impossibility, but a political masterpiece. It says to the realm, there are no more sides. There is only the rose. But the ghosts of the Civil War are not easily exorcised. The first decade of Henry's reign is plagued by the shadows of the brothers at war. Because the fate of the princes in the Tower was never proven, the realm is haunted by pretenders. Boys put forward by Yorkist diehards, claiming to be the lost sons of Edward IV. First comes Lambert Simnel, a 10-year-old boy coached by a priest to impersonate the Earl of Warwick. The Yorkist lords in Ireland crown him King Edward VI, with a golden circlet taken from a statue of the Virgin Mary. Henry VII crushes the rebellion at the Battle of Stoke Field in 1487, the true final battle of the Wars of the Roses. But his treatment of the boy Simnel is a stroke of genius. He does not execute him. He does not make a martyr of him. He puts him to work in the royal kitchen, turning the meat on the spit. It is a gesture of supreme, contemptuous confidence. He turns a rival king into a servant, proving that the pretender was never a threat, only a joke. Then comes a darker threat, Perkin Warbeck. This young man claims to be Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the princes in the Tower. He looks the part, handsome, courtly, favored by the kings of France and Scotland. For 6 years, he haunts Henry VII, a ghost refusing to stay dead. He invades England, he rallies the Cornish, he marries a Scottish princess. But Henry VII does not panic. He uses his favorite weapons, spies, bribes, and diplomacy. He isolates Warbeck, cutting off his support, until the prince is forced to surrender. Even then, Henry keeps him at court, a guest, under watch, until Warbeck tries to escape. Only then does the king sign the death warrant. In 1499, Warbeck is hanged, and the last legitimate Plantagenet claimant, the innocent Earl of Warwick, is beheaded. It is a clearing of the decks. Henry VII has decided that for his dynasty to live, the old royal blood must finally run dry. With the rivals dead, the king turns his attention to the real enemy, the ambition of the nobility. He realizes that the brothers at war fought because they had the money and the men to do it. So he takes both away. He bans livery and maintenance, the practice of lords keeping private armies. He uses a tribunal known as the Court of Star Chamber to fine the barons into submission. If a lord builds a castle without permission, he is fined. If he keeps too many servants, he is fined. Henry Thestho hits them in the wallet, the only place that truly hurts. He transforms the monarchy from a feudal ringleader into a terrifyingly efficient bureaucracy. The ink of the ledger becomes mightier than the sword of the knight. The castles that once withstood sieges are allowed to crumble or are converted into comfortable manor houses with large windows. Because in Henry's England, you don't need a fortress. You need a good accountant. The ultimate symbol of this new peace arrives not on a battlefield, but in a birthing chamber. In September 1486, Elizabeth of York gives birth to a son. They name him Arthur, a callback to the ancient mythical king of the Britons, a name that predates York and Lancaster. Prince Arthur is the living embodiment of the Union of the Roses. In his face, the features of the two warring houses are blended. The prophecy is fulfilled. The Civil War is not just over. It has been bred out of existence. As Henry VII ages, he becomes more paranoid, more grasping, hoarding gold in the cellars of Richmond Palace, until he is the richest king in Christendom. He is not loved, but he is respected, and more importantly, he is feared. He dies in 1509, leaving a stable throne and a full treasury to his second son, the magnificent, terrifying Henry VIII. Arthur, having died young, the medieval world of private wars, of cousins killing cousins in the snow, of crowns lost in bushes and baggage trains, is gone. The modern state has arrived. The brothers at war have been replaced by the Prince of the State. The camera of history pulls back now, rising high above the muddy fields of Towton, above the stone walls of the tower, above the quiet ruins of castles that once bristled with spears. The shouting has stopped. The armor has rusted into the earth, becoming iron oxide in the soil that feeds the wheat. The families that tore each other apart, the Plantagenets, the Nevilles, the Percys, have become names in genealogy books, their fury distilled into ink. The great wheel of fortune, which lifted kings up and crushed them down with such violent regularity, has been slowed by the heavy hand of the Tudors. We look back at the tapestry we have woven, seeing the red threads of blood and the gold threads of crowns, and we see the pattern at last. It was a painful birth of a nation, a lesson learned in the hardest possible way, that a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand, and that peace is a fragile garden that must be watered with vigilance. The white rose and the red rose are entwined now, carved in stone on the ceiling of King's College Chapel, frozen in a beauty that can no longer hurt anyone. The long war is over. The house is quiet. The fire in the hearth has burned down to glowing embers, casting a soft, pulsing warmth across the room. The shadows have stopped dancing. They are resting now, just as you are. The kings and queens, the knights and the rebels, have all retreated back into the mist, their voices fading into the gentle rhythm of your own breathing. You have walked through centuries of storm, but you have come out the other side, into this safe, quiet moment. The history books are closed. The dates and the names are drifting away like leaves on a slow-moving river, floating downstream into the dark. There is no more conflict here, no more choosing sides, no more waiting for the dawn. There is only the stillness of the present, the heavy, comfortable weight of your blankets, and the knowledge that the past is a story that cannot touch you. You are the stillness after the battle. You are the peace that follows the noise. Let your mind drift on that river, deeper and deeper into the velvet night. The stars are watching over you, just as they watched over them, steady and eternal. Sleep now. The story is done. Sweet dreams.